What if I told you the universe runs on a secret primordial algorithm? Not one written in lines of code, but one that's woven into the very fabric of reality itself. An algorithm that decides what's meaningful and what isn't, what's coincidence and what's fate, what's real and what's merely imagined. Nearly a century ago, Carl Jung believed that he had just discovered that algorithm. He called it synchronicity, where two or more events are connected not by cause and effect, but by cosmic significance. Well, 100 years later, and that idea has resurfaced in what I consider one of the strangest ways possible. Hundreds of videos scattered across every social media platform, all of which are claiming to be signs from the universe with messages meant just for you. The only difference is that, unlike the days of Carl Jung, these aren't mere coincidences. They are specifically engineered by computer algorithms to find you. If algorithms can mimic the feeling of synchronicity so perfectly, how will we ever be able to tell the difference between a sign with cosmic significance and one that's just made by your favorite big tech company? In fact, is there even a difference? Or is it all just one big conspiracy? In 1929, Jung began formulating an idea that would divide scientists and mystics for generations. Synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of two or more events connected not by cause and effect, but by significance. For instance, if you've ever thought of a friend moments before they text you, or dreamt of a place that you later visited by chance, Jung believed that these weren't random. He believed they were glimpses into a deeper structure of reality, one where psyche and matter are interwoven. Now, I get it. Today, this might just sound like woo mysticism, but when Jung first came up with this idea, physics itself was going through a major crisis. Quantum physics had just shattered the old mechanical understanding of the universe. And Nobel-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli, Jung's closest collaborator, was struggling with his own metaphysical questions. Together, they dreamed of a world where psychology and physics weren't opposites, but were two halves of the same truth. In their letters, Jung and Pauli described a hidden order of meaning behind reality. Not fate, not magic, but an acausal connection, a moment where the inner and outer worlds mirror each other. And it was a bold idea, maybe too bold, because science couldn't measure it, and science still can't measure it. Which is why, even today, synchronicity sits on the edge between philosophy and mysticism. It's too poetic for physics and too structured for spirituality. Yet, the intuition behind it still feels tangible to a lot of people. It's that feeling that life sometimes breaks its own logic to remind us that we're connected to something larger. In a way, the beauty of synchronicity was always the fact that it seemed to happen sparingly and also when you least expect it. It was rare and fleeting, which made it precious. But what happens when computer algorithms can replicate that feeling of synchronicity on demand? Well, this is the unfortunate reality that we're living in, where the idea of meaning has become commodified and exploited for monetary gain. When a TikTok video declares, "If you're seeing this, the universe has chosen you," it's not divine timing, it's pattern recognition turned into a business strategy. It feels like the cosmos is speaking, but that's just content strategy that's designed to optimize for the most emotional response. And what gets us more emotionally charged than feeling like we're a part of something much bigger than us? You start with one sign, one comforting clip, and before you know it, your feed becomes an echo chamber of cosmic affirmations. Every scroll feels like a message. Every coincidence feels like proof. But the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to tell whether meaning is emerging or just being manufactured. And that's the tension Jung never foresaw. That the next great system of meaning would be built not by mystics, but by engineers. And yet, it still works because we're wired for it. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. It's how we survive, by spotting faces in the dark, predators in the bushes, or constellations in the sky. Jung believed this instinct for pattern and meaning was rooted in what was called the collective unconscious, a shared symbolic framework passed through myths and dreams. The algorithm taps into that same architecture, but instead of revealing the unconscious, it exploits it. That's why it feels spiritual. That's why it feels personal. It's because it's trained on the most intimate data that you can offer. Your fears, your curiosities, your longing for direction and meaning. We used to see coincidences as rare glimpses into the mystery of existence, and now they're part of the user experience of almost every single social media app. The problem is that this can lead to a dangerous comfort, one that leaves us more vulnerable than ever before. And to understand just how terrifying this is, we need to first understand Jungian synchronicity. And to do that, we need to go back nearly 100 years. Zurich, 1929. A faint hum of rain against glass. The scent of old books and ink. Inside a dimly lit office, Carl Jung sits across from a woman named Sarah. Sarah is a patient of reason. She's skeptical, articulate, and almost too logical for her own good. For months, she's come to Jung to untangle dreams that refuse to make any sense. But every time, her intellect shields her from feeling. She talks about her emotions the way a scientist dissects a frog, from a safe, sterile distance. On this day, however, something shifts. Sarah tells Jung about a dream she had the night before. In it, she's handed a golden scarab, a sacred Egyptian beetle symbolizing rebirth and transformation. She laughs while she tells the story. She's embarrassed by how absurd it sounds. "You'll have to excuse me, Dr. Jung," she says. "I don't believe in signs or omens." Jung listens quietly, taking notes, his pen scratching across paper. He's used to this kind of skepticism, especially from intelligent patients. But just as Sarah finishes describing the scarab, there's a soft, rhythmic tapping at the window behind him. Tap, tap, tap. Jung turns around. Something small is fluttering against the glass, desperate to get in. He opens the window, and in flies a beetle. A rose chafer, metallic gold-green, shining in the afternoon light. Jung catches it midair, studies it for a moment, and then hands it to her. "Here," he says softly. "Here's your scarab." Sarah freezes. For a long moment, she just stares at it, silent, breathless. And then something cracks inside of her. The armor of logic, the cold shield of reason, it all gives way to a trembling, wordless recognition. And then she bursts into tears. And that, for Jung, was it. The defining moment, the spark that gave birth to one of his most controversial ideas, synchronicity. To Jung, this wasn't about a dream predicting reality. It wasn't a supernatural event or proof of psychic powers. But it was a collision. An intersection between the inner and outer worlds, joined not by cause, but by meaning. The dream of the scarab and the arrival of the beetle shared no physical link, and yet they were bound by an invisible thread of significance that reached beyond chance. For Jung, it was as if reality itself had turned symbolic, like the universe was speaking through coincidence. The scarab wasn't just a beetle anymore, it was a mirror. A message from the unconscious reflected in the physical world. And let's be honest, he knew how crazy it all sounded. Even in 1929, when spiritualism was fashionable, Jung wasn't chasing ghosts. He was searching for a way to connect the mind and matter, the psyche and physics. And that's what synchronicity really was. It was an attempt to repair the split between science and meaning. You see, Jung came from a world torn in two. On one side, there was the materialist certainty of early science, the belief that everything could be explained by cause and effect. And on the other hand, there was the symbolic chaos of the unconscious, dreams, myths, and archetypes that defied logic. Jung wanted to reconcile the two halves. He believed that the psyche wasn't separate from the cosmos, but woven into it, that somewhere beneath causality and randomness, there existed a deeper order, what Jung called the unus mundus, Latin for one world. In this world, the mind and the universe were mirrors of each other. The dream and the beetle, the inner image and the outer event. Not opposites, but two expressions of the same underlying reality. And it was radical, even heretical. But it was also deeply human. Because, be honest with me, who hasn't felt that eerie alignment between thought and the world? That instant where something deeply personal and cosmic briefly overlap. Around the same time, Jung began corresponding with Wolfgang Pauli, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist famous for discovering the exclusion principle. Pauli was going through a breakdown. His personal life was in shambles, and his dreams had grown disturbingly symbolic, filled with mandalas, animals, and mythic imagery that he could not make sense of. When he came to Jung for help, their relationship evolved into something extraordinary. Together, they began to explore the borderland between physics and psychology. Pauli's world was made of particles and logic. Jung's was made of symbols and archetypes, but both sensed that the two might be connected through some unseen fabric and a causal order that governed not how things happen, but why they mean something when they do. In their letters, they describe this hidden pattern like a cosmic mirror, an interplay between mind and matter that reveals itself only in moments of profound resonance. Pauli saw it as the irrational arrangement of events, while Jung called it the psychophysical unity of all things. If you strip away the spiritual language, what they were chasing was almost algorithmic. A pattern recognition system built into reality itself, one that doesn't calculate outcomes but curates significance. To the scientific community, Jung's idea was just too poetic to be taken seriously. Even today, physicists dismiss synchronicity as anecdotal, an illusion created by selective memory and cognitive bias. And they're not wrong. Humans are masters of confirmation bias. We remember the hits, we forget the misses, and then we create these narratives from what's left of it all. It's the same thing that makes gamblers believe in lucky streaks and lovers believe in soulmates. But Jung knew that too. He never claimed synchronicity could be measured or predicted. To him, its mystery was the point. It was a philosophy of meaning, not mechanism. Synchronicity wasn't supposed to replace science, it was meant to complete it, to fill the emotional and symbolic void left behind by a purely causal worldview. Because while science can tell us how things happen, it often struggles to explain why they matter in the first place. To Jung, Sarah's scarab wasn't about proving an afterlife or telepathy. It was about awakening her to something beyond the cold grip of logic. In that single moment, her dream, something deeply internal, found its reflection in the world outside. It shattered the illusion that mind and matter are strangers, and in that realization, something inside of her changed. That was the essence of synchronicity. Transformation through meaning. It's not about bending reality to your will. So, fast forward a century, and Jung's dilemma has evolved into something far stranger. We no longer live in a world that doubts science. We live in one that pretty much drowns in it. We have more information, more connectivity, more access to knowledge than ever before, yet we are lonelier, we are more anxious, and we are more desperate for meaning and significance than ever before. This, funny enough, was Jung's point. We now understand every single working of the universe, or almost every single working. We have telescopes that can see billions of light years into deep space, and more than ever before, we struggle to understand why any of that matters to us. This hunger for meaning has created a new spiritual marketplace, one that has been excessively filled by modern-day algorithms, ones that are designed to mimic synchronicity without any of the depth. We've become addicted to coincidence, to chance, such that we have no more regard for it when it happens. The joy of the rare, fleeting coincidences is gone, replaced by a digital unus mundus, a place where our thoughts and emotions shape what appears before us, except this time it's not random chance. It's specifically designed that way to keep us trapped in our own echo chambers. It mimics synchronicity perfectly, but empties it of its essence, because true synchronicity is transformative. It's not predictive. It doesn't feed you existing beliefs, it challenges them. It doesn't flatter your psyche, it awakens it. And the algorithm does the opposite. It burrows you deeper into what you already feel and think. It's giving you signs that never question you because all it wants is your attention. And it does that by continuously feeding you with things it knows won't challenge you or force you to pause and think, even for a second. That's what makes the difference between meaning and manipulation. Jung saw this clearly with Sarah. Her moment with the scarab forced her to confront something that logic couldn't explain. It challenged her worldview. It cracked her certainty open. But let's be honest, if that moment happened today, I think it would play out very differently. Instead of sitting there with shock, she'd probably search for an answer online. Within seconds, she'd either be flooded with videos explaining synchronicity or, quote, real proof of synchronicity or whatever she picks, and the algorithm wouldn't let her sit in her wonder. It would overanalyze and explain it all away, or even worse, slowly radicalize her and turn her into a full mysticist while profiting off of that. Instead of being transformed by the experience, she'd be trapped in a loop that only reinforces what she already believes. To make matters worse, all of these algorithms collect an insane amount of data from you. These systems watch your every move, and they store that information and then use it to manipulate you, whether that's simply to serve you ads or even something more nefarious like identity theft and scams if that data falls into the wrong hands. Your name, your income, your family, even your struggles. Data brokers collect these fragments of your life and package them into lists that are then sold to the highest bidder. There are real data broker lists with insane labels like tough start, young single parents, and rural and barely making it, that prey on the most vulnerable in our society. We're all sorted into categories for predatory companies and bad actors to use to identify and harm us. This is one of the biggest tragedies of the modern algorithms that we are all unfortunately living under, and it's invasive and dangerous. Carl Jung once said that the greater the light, the darker the shadow. He meant that as a warning, that every act of enlightenment casts a corresponding darkness somewhere else in the psyche. Nearly a century later, that prophecy has come true in a form that Jung could never have imagined. Because while the digital age has illuminated the world with infinite information, it has also birthed something vast, invisible, and hungry, a shadow that feeds on attention and emotion. That shadow is the algorithm. There's a moment every user experiences. You're scrolling through your feed late at night, and suddenly a video stops you in your tracks. It says something that you've been thinking, but you never said out loud. Maybe it names your heartbreak, your fear, your confusion. Maybe it feels too specific to be random. The caption reads, "If you found this, it was meant to." You stare at it, frozen. The timing feels impossible. The tone is perfect. The message is uncanny. You whisper to yourself, "What are the odds?" The answer is simple. The odds are astronomical unless something is watching you. Well, okay, not watching you exactly, but watching your behavior. Every click, pause, replay, like, and comment. It learns the rhythm of your moods the way a therapist learns the patterns of your trauma, and in return, it gives you meaning in small, personalized doses. This is what Jung called projection, but it's digitized now. In therapy, projection happens when we unconsciously cast parts of ourselves onto others, whether they're desires, fears, or archetypes. On the internet, we project onto the algorithm. We imagine it knows us, cares for us, and understands what we need. In truth, it only knows what keeps us there. The algorithm has become the new oracle, except this oracle doesn't interpret our dreams, it predicts engagement. What makes all of this so seductive is how much it feels like synchronicity. It's the same emotional rhythm. You have a thought. Oh, a coincidence. Significance. But that architecture has changed. Where Jung's synchronicity was spontaneous, algorithmic synchronicity is manufactured. It doesn't arise from the unus mundus, the unity of psyche and matter, but from data feedback loops. This coincidence isn't acausal anymore, it's designed. The more emotional the connection, the higher the watch time. The higher the watch time, the stronger the reinforcement. The stronger the reinforcement, the deeper the illusion of meaning. And it's uncanny how well it mimics the real thing. The language of the digital prophet sounds almost Jungian. You're seeing this for a reason. The universe wanted you to hear this. Trust that this video found you at the right time. Except the universe here is a neural network running on data centers that are probably going to consume all the world's water and electricity, so there's that. The irony is that Jung would have understood this perfectly. He warned that when societies lose their connection to genuine spirituality, they unconsciously recreate it through symbols and technology. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures in the light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this endless cycle of algorithmic reassurance is that darkness. The defining difference between Jungian and algorithmic synchronicity lies in where the mirror is placed. For Jung, the mirror was inward. It revealed unconscious truths, forcing the individual to confront themselves. The external coincidence was just the reflection. In the modern version, the mirror faces outward. The algorithm becomes the interpreter of the soul. It reflects what you already feel, amplifies it, and then feeds it back to you. When you're lonely, it shows you a connection. When you're heartbroken, it offers solace. When you're uncertain, it promises destiny. But notice what's missing: transformation. In Jungian terms, real synchronicity is alchemical. It turns experience into insight. It leads to integration, the process of bringing the unconscious into awareness. Algorithmic synchronicity, on the other hand, is narcissistic. It keeps you circling your own reflection like Narcissus gazing into the digital pond. It provides the illusion of depth without the discomfort of growth. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of the psyche that holds everything that we reject: fear, shame, desire, and ego. It's not evil, it's unconscious. And when we refuse to face it, it controls us from the dark. The modern algorithm is the shadow of the collective psyche. It's made from us, from every search, every confession, every late-night curiosity we've never said out loud. It knows what we crave and what we hide. It reflects both our best and worst impulses, magnifying whichever one keeps us scrolling. And the more we feed it, the more it learns. The more it learns, the less we recognize of ourselves. Jung warned that those who cannot confront their own shadow will project it onto the world. And that's exactly what's happening. We project our confusion, our longing, our disconnection, and the machine feeds it back as content. But Jung would remind us, even the shadow has something to teach us. If synchronicity once revealed the hidden harmony of the cosmos, perhaps its modern distortion reveals something else, the architecture of our collective soul. Maybe the algorithm didn't steal our spirituality, maybe it's exposing it. Maybe this machine mirror shows us how desperate we've become for signs, how starved we are for reflection, how disconnected from mystery. What happens to a species that forgets how to find meaning without machines, though? Carl Jung believed that the human mind is a meaning-making machine, but he also believed that meaning wasn't something we could simply invent. It was something that revealed itself, an echo from the deeper layers of the psyche. Today, that distinction has all but collapsed. We live in an age where meaning isn't found, it's delivered to us. We scroll through an endless feed of curated symbols, emotions, and signs, all tailored to resonate with our current psychological state, and it feels profound. But behind the curtain, it's mechanical. An assembly line of coincidences, and this is the age of manufactured synchronicity. To understand why this illusion works, you have to understand what we are. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. Like I said before, it's our evolutionary superpower, and it's our greatest vulnerability. Tens of thousands of years ago, recognizing patterns kept us alive. That rustle in the bushes usually means there's a predator there waiting to kill us. The shape of the stars guided our migration patterns. The rhythm of the seasons told us when to plant and when to harvest. And all of these signs were easier to understand and remember when we weaved them into stories. And this is how we created myths and legends. Jung saw this instinct as the foundation of both myth and psyche. In his view, the unconscious constantly seeks to connect inner and outer events, weaving them into a symbolic tapestry. But what happens when that instinct, that need for story, is connected to a machine that never stops? We've built a system that takes the deepest human instinct, the hunger for meaning, and turned it into junk food for the soul. In psychology, there's a term for our tendency to see meaning in random events. The term is apophenia. It's the same mechanism that makes us see faces in clouds, shapes in constellations, or messages in static. But apophenia isn't a flaw, it's our brain's default mode. Our neurons are constantly trying to predict, categorize, and link information. When we spot a coincidence that feels emotionally charged, that dopamine surges. The experience becomes sticky, and we remember it. That's why coincidences feel magical. They trigger the same reward circuitry as falling in love or solving a puzzle. Now, imagine what happens when you give the brain access to an algorithm trained to produce those exact dopamine spikes. You scroll, you feel, you react, and the system learns from that. It keeps refining what kind of coincidence gets your attention. Before long, every feed feels enchanted. A line from a video mirrors something you wrote in your journal. A song lyric aligns with your breakup. A stranger's story echoes your private thoughts. It's not magic, it's math. But it feels like magic because the brain can't tell the difference. There's an idea that psychologists call illusory correlation, the belief that two unrelated events are meaningfully connected. It's the foundation of superstition, ritual, and even religion. The modern algorithm exploits this bias perfectly. Because when an app delivers content that matches your emotional state, it feels like fate. You were sad and suddenly you got the healing energy video. You were uncertain and the trust the process clip appeared. The coincidence seems divine because it's so perfectly timed. Even when we know what's happening, we still fall for it. Why? Because the experience of feeling chosen is profoundly comforting. In a world that feels increasingly chaotic, random, and indifferent, being chosen restores a sense of order. It tells you that you're not drifting alone through meaningless data, that there's still a pattern, a pulse, a higher logic that sees you. That's why the algorithm found me feels nearly identical to The universe sent me a sign. They both scratch the same existential itch. It's the same hunger Jung wrote about when he described modern man's spiritual starvation. He said that in the absence of gods, we seek substitutes, psychology, ideology, even technology to fill the void. The algorithm, whether we realize it or not, has become one of those substitutes. It's the first god built entirely from our collective behavior. And here's the tragedy. The more the algorithm feeds us coincidences, the less we engage in the process of making meaning ourselves. Jung believed that the act of interpreting synchronicity, of pausing, reflecting, and integrating its message was the point. It forced the conscious mind to dialogue with the unconscious. But in the algorithmic age, that dialogue is outsourced. We don't reflect, we simply react. We consume and keep it moving, never pausing to integrate what we've learned into our lives. Meaning used to be participatory, something co-created through awareness. Now it's passive, something delivered through recommendations. Look closely, and you'll notice the spiritual architecture hidden inside of our platforms. They have priests, influencers, rituals, scrolling, liking, sharing, doctrines, trust the universe, manifest your reality, and even confessions, comment sections filled with personal testimonies. By the way, like, comment, and subscribe. Each app is a miniature religion, optimized for retention rather than redemption. Its sermons are short, its revelations constant, and its God invisible. An algorithm that listens, rewards, and remembers. But unlike the gods of old, this one doesn't require belief, it only requires behavior. Your faith is measured in engagement. Jung warned that when archetypes are not recognized consciously, they take possession of us unconsciously. The archetype of the prophet, the healer, the savior, all of these have re-emerged online, stripped of context and multiplied by virality. It's no coincidence that the phrase, "this video found you," has replaced "the universe has spoken." The myth has adapted to its medium. Jung's idea of collective unconsciousness, a shared psychic reservoir of symbols and instincts, has always been controversial. But what's fascinating is that algorithms have, in their own way, created a technological version of it. Think about it. Billions of human behaviors feeding into a single system that learns our shared patterns, fears, and longings. It's a collective mind built not from archetypes but from engagement data. And it's eerie, but it's also poetic, as if we've built a machine that externalizes the very unconscious Jung tried to describe, a mirror of humanity that reflects both our light and our shadow, our wisdom and our wounds. The danger of living in a world that constantly mirrors us is that it erodes our ability to tolerate mystery. If every thought can be validated by a post and every emotion mirrored by a video, then nothing surprises us anymore. Synchronicity once startled the soul. It was a rupture in the ordinary, a brief confrontation with the unknown, a sense of awe and wonder. But digital synchronicity has replaced that wonder with comfort, and when comfort is constant, it becomes a cage. The question isn't whether the algorithm is evil. It isn't. It's a reflection, a feedback mechanism built from our own nature. The problem is that it tempts us to surrender our agency in exchange for effortless meaning. But meaning, Jung would argue, was never meant to be effortless. It's born from friction. It's facing the shadow, confronting the irrational, interpreting the coincidence for ourselves. The algorithm can imitate synchronicity, but it can never replace the conscious act of understanding it. In that sense, we stand at the same crossroads Jung faced nearly a century ago, between the measurable and the meaningful, between the comfort of systems and the chaos of mystery. The difference is that our system is faster, smarter, and more seductive than anything he could have imagined. They mirror our unconscious drives in real time, turning the entire world into a psycho-technical reflection of humanity. In many ways, the digital age has fulfilled Jung's dream of bridging psyche and matter, just not in any way that he intended. The unus mundus, the one world that he described, has re-emerged in the global network, a collective web where the boundaries between mind and world blur completely. Your thoughts shape what you see. Your psyche literally manifests its contents into your external environment, not through mystical means, but through data feedback. You scroll long enough, and the outer world begins to reflect your inner world perfectly. Your anxieties, your curiosities, your wounds, all mirrored back through personalized content. It is almost mystical. Almost. Jung wanted to prove that the psyche could influence reality through meaning. Well, we've achieved that, but through code instead of cosmic consciousness. The universe didn't reveal its algorithm, so we build one ourselves. There's something poetically tragic about this. We've created a mirror vast enough to contain the collective human soul, and yet, look what we've done with it. We've just filled it with noise. The internet was supposed to connect us. Instead, it's dividing us more than ever before. It shows us what we want, what we fear, and what we hate, but rarely, if ever, what we need. But we can do something about it. We can take the power back from the algorithm and not let it dictate our lives. Jung used to tell his patients, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If the algorithm is the new unconscious, then the same law applies. Until we make it conscious, it will direct our lives, and we'll call it destiny, synchronicity, or divine timing. But consciousness changes everything. The moment you realize the algorithm is not the universe, that illusion cracks. The coincidence stops being mystical and becomes informational. And in that pause, that flicker of awareness, something beautiful happens. You reclaim authorship. You start asking why the content resonates, not just what it says. You start intentionally creating meaning instead of just accepting it. Let's imagine this. You're scrolling one night, and a video appears that feels like it's speaking directly to the pain that you're feeling. You pause. Instead of accepting it as divine timing, you ask, why does this feel meant for me? And the answer might surprise you. It's not that the universe sent it. You did. You created the pattern that brought it to you through your attention. The meaning then isn't in the coincidence, it's in your awareness of it. That's what Jung meant when he said that awareness transforms experience. It's not the event that's sacred, it's the consciousness that sees through it. The algorithm becomes less of a prophet and more of a mirror, a tool that can reveal your desires, fears, and archetypes if you learn to look with intention instead of impulse. In that way, the algorithm might accidentally serve Jung's vision after all, not as a divine messenger, but as a teacher of awareness. If Jung were alive today, he might look at the algorithm and say, so this is how the collective unconsciousness dreams now. Because that is what it is, a digital dreamscape, a reflection of our shared psyche, alive with symbols, projections, and archetypes all rendered in pixels. It's messy, shallow, profound, and dangerous, but it's also us. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the algorithm isn't an intruder in the story of meaning. Maybe it's simply the latest chapter, a tool forcing us to confront the oldest human question. What makes something meaningful? When the scarab flew into Jung's study, it wasn't proof of a supernatural law, it was a mirror moment. A reminder that reality still held mystery. Every time a video finds you, you face the same choice Jung faced that day. You can see it as random. You can see it as divine. Or, if you look closely enough, you can see it as an invitation to wake up, to step outside the loop, to meet the machine with awareness, to recognize that meaning has never been something we're given. It's always something that we create.
If I asked you the question, what is man's greatest invention? What would your answer be? There's a lot of options. Would it be fire? Because it gives us warmth, protection, and the ability to cook our meals. Or perhaps you would pick the wheel, because it's the driving force behind the beginnings of trade, commerce, and travel. While both of these are excellent choices, most of the time when we think about the greatest inventions of mankind, we tend to forget one of the most important ones of all: money. But unlike man's other great inventions, money is immaterial. Maybe that's why we don't often think of it in the same breath as some of the other great inventions. Things like fire and the wheel are tangible, but not money. Money is merely an idea, an illusion whose value is non-existent, only determined by the importance we place on it. Or at least money as we know it today. However, the fact that money is an illusion does not in any way undermine its importance. Before we created money, we were forced to trade goods and services directly in what we refer to as the barter system, people exchanging goods and services for other goods and services in return. Because there was no arbitrary value placed on these items, every single trade was determined by what each party was willing to give up for something that they wanted. It was kind of like a game. If I wanted some of your vegetables for dinner, but I only reared cattle, I would have to give you one of my animals in exchange for a bag of vegetables. If I wanted shoes to wear, but I only made tents, I would have had to give you an entire tent in exchange for a pair of shoes. And immediately you can already see one of the major problems with this system of trade. It's the asymmetry. As a tent maker, there's no way I wouldn't feel cheated having to exchange an entire living space for simple footwear. Because there was no standardized medium of exchange, it was very difficult to get two people who needed things from each other to come to an agreement. Having to wait until a double coincidence of once where two people need the exact opposite thing at the same time was also very difficult and inefficient. And that wasn't all. You see, our money is not only a medium of exchange, it's also considered a store of value. And before the invention of money, some people could never store their wealth for no fault of their own. Think about the farmer who sells tomatoes and the man who makes tents. The man who makes tents can create an entire village of real estate and barter it out with anyone who needs a place to rest their head all year long, and he would probably cash out on that. But the farmer who sells tomatoes can only barter when tomatoes are in season. And because tomatoes are perishable goods, he cannot keep them for a long period of time. So, although he would be putting in the same effort into his business as the tent maker, there's absolutely no way for him to remain wealthy all year long. There's also the problem of having something that only very few people want. Nowadays, when starting a business, you're often told to find a niche, a small group of people who are very interested in what you have to offer. Before money was a thing, that advice would have you left with nothing worth bartering. The people who had the most were those who owned things that everyone wanted. Things like weapons, animal skin, and salt. But then since everyone knew that everyone wanted these things, they started buying them even if they didn't need them at the time, just so they could trade with them later. And so commodity money became a thing. People would exchange goods and services for the most common items, like salt or weapons, and just use that to trade for what they want from someone else. From salt and weapons to tiny collectibles like shells and beads, humanity had found a better way to trade and transact. Instead of exchanging goods and services for goods and services you may not need at the time, you can exchange your goods and services for arbitrary objects to act as placeholders of value, an IOU, or IOU. After that, you can use these placeholders to get goods and services you actually want from someone else. The idea was brilliant, so brilliant that the entire world slowly moved away from the barter system to the money trading system. But there was still one problem with this medium of exchange. You see, for money to be worth anything, it needs to be scarce. The more available something is, the lesser its implied value. That's basic economics. If everyone can get their hands on something, it can't be worth that much, right? So things like sand or shells that you could easily pick up on any beach weren't really a good measure of value. As a result, around the year 770 BC, the first metal coins were created in China. As a sort of homage, the Chinese made miniature versions of the tools that were once regarded as currency. They made the coins circular so that it was easy to reach into your pocket and take them out without hurting your fingers. Then they cast the coins in bronze. This was it. Money was finally worth something. You couldn't just go to a beach somewhere and pick up bronze. It was scarce, it had value. At this time, money wasn't yet an illusion. The value of a coin was determined by the value of the metal the coin was made out of. If you had a coin that was made from 1 gram of gold, it was worth 1 gram of gold. You could easily measure it and see for yourself that it is, in fact, 1 gram of gold. However, kings and rulers quickly discovered the power of money. They realized that the more of these tiny precious metals you had, the more power you could control. And so in 600 BC, Alyattes, king of Lydia, created the first official money mint. He created the coins using a mix of silver and gold, and stamped an image on the coin to act as denominations. Now people could easily tell the value of the piece of metal they were holding simply by looking at the picture on its face. But the kings of the world wanted more money, and precious metals were too expensive. To produce more money, they started slimming down the coins, then mixing the more expensive metals with cheaper metals. Soon, all the coins in circulation were worth less than what the image on their face said they were worth, and so the illusion of money was born. The value of the coin was no longer determined by the value of the metal. The value of the coin was now simply what the rulers in the bank said it was. So 1 British pound sterling represented 1 pound of sterling silver. However, when international trade became a thing, people realized that metal coins were too heavy to lug around, and so kings around the world started issuing IOU certificates for long-distance trading. Because these pieces of paper were stamped by the king, people trusted its value and believed that they could use it to get back whatever it was worth in coins, and that was true for the time being. As more of these IOU certificates flooded the market, people needed coins less and less, until finally, the paper was worth what we believed it was worth, even if we no longer exchanged it for physical pieces of gold and silver. From ancient kings to modern-day governments and central banks, money has remained an illusion, a mere representation whose value is determined by the importance people place on it. The most valuable banknote in circulation today is the 10,000 Singapore dollars note. Although not being produced anymore, this single piece of paper worth $7,345 at the moment is still regarded as a legal tender, so you can still use it to buy things, valuable things like houses, cars, and even metals like gold. The banknote itself costs less than 20 cents to produce, but the illusion of the fiat currency system means it's as valuable as 120 grams of gold. Fiat is the fancy word we use to describe the modern-day illusion. It's a Latin word that translates to "let it be done." It's a decree by the government that, in the case of money, determines what its value is and enforces it as legal tender. The illusion of money is one that we never really think about, but just like the kings of old, the governments of today understand the power of money and, as always, want more of it. They know that the more of these pieces of paper you have, the more power you have. So what do? Well, they can simply create more pieces of paper out of thin air. Yes, if, for example, the United States government wanted $340 million for, I don't know, maybe another F-22 jet, they can simply print the money to do so. But there's one problem with this: inflation. The thing about money is that primarily, it needs to be a means of exchange to be considered valuable. So the amount of money in circulation needs to reflect the output of the goods and services that are being produced. When more money is printed than there are goods and services, all other things being equal, the prices of these goods and services increase, and the value of the money itself drops. This is why many economists, and even everyday people like you and me, are worried about the current global reserve currency, the United States dollar. 2020 was a terrible year for the entire world. In the wake of the pandemic, most economies had to be shut down. The goods and services available and the general output of the economy was reduced to mere trickles, and the world kind of came to a halt for a while. Because there wasn't as much money flowing around, to keep the economy from going under and basically our world falling apart, the US government started printing money at a rate faster than has ever been printed before in its entire existence. Right now, 40% of the US dollars in existence today were printed in the last 18 months alone. That's outrageous. And because the output of the country hasn't really increased by that much, eventually, the prices of the goods and services might start to skyrocket. You can see this taking place in the price of commodities, such as lumber, which had as much as tripled in price from just a year ago. If you haven't noticed, some of the prices of the things at your favorite restaurants are now slightly higher than they were last year. It's an ever so small increase. Maybe the guac at Chipotle is 20 cents higher, but it's happening right there under your nose. On the surface, it seems like a good thing that governments decided to send out stimulus and unemployment checks to their citizens. But the reality is, it's a double-edged sword. Of course, it helps those most in need, and that's a good thing. We're at the point where, because of inflation and a slowed economy, people really aren't able to get the right jobs at the right times. Sometimes it's not even because they don't want them, but because it's simply worse than the alternative. For example, in the United States at least, if you're a waiter or a waitress, you aren't required by law to be paid even minimum wage. Some are literally paid $2 to $3 an hour, with the rest of their income coming from tips. But with a lot of restrictions and rules in place around the country, and not as many people going out, there's less customers. Less customers with less money means less tips. If your employees aren't making enough money, they're gonna quit. Simple as that. If your business doesn't have employees to help you run it, you're going to go under. It's a domino effect. But what can you even do? When you can earn more money from unemployment and stimulus checks than you would from being employed, why even look for a job in the first place? You see, the Federal Reserve of the United States is a very sneaky way for the government to essentially create money out of thin air and pump it into the economy without people thinking too much about it. Before 2020, the United States was $29 trillion in debt. It's an unbelievable and inconceivable amount of money to even begin with. This debt is obtained in the form of bonds and treasury notes, which are basically just pieces of paper that say the government will pay you so-and-so amount plus interest. Right now, a 10-year US Treasury bond will return you about 1.23% on your investment at expiry. So if you put in $1,000 today, you'll have made $12.30 by 2031. That sounds terrible already, but to add icing onto the cake, it doesn't even keep up with inflation, which is targeted to stay around 2% a year. It's a lot higher than that, but that's for another time. By investing in government notes of your own country, which issues the currency you use every single day, you actually lose buying power over a decade. It is weakened by the day. But regardless, banks, businesses, and individuals around the world buy these bonds and treasury notes, and the government uses all that money it gets back how it sees fit. However, when it's time for the government to pay its debt, all the money they made has already been spent. So they buy back all the treasuries and bonds, but only from the big financial institutions, and then pay them back with new money created out of thin air. Since March 2020, the Federal Reserve has bought back over $1 trillion in bonds, and is planning to continue to do so for the foreseeable future. With all the new money pumped into them by the government, banks can now give out more loans to people, earn more interest, and help grow the economy. But this increases the total amount of money in circulation, reducing the value of each dollar. With multi-trillion-dollar stimulus payments and infrastructure packages, it makes you wonder how long this stuff can go on for. New money steals value from old money. The amount in your bank account doesn't change, but because of the new money the government has just printed out of thin air, your money is no longer valuable as it once was. Basically, every second you store your wealth in any fiat currency, such as the US dollar, it is being devalued. You could stare at your bank balance, and day by day, you'll be able to buy less and less things with whatever you have left. The reality that money is nothing but an illusion is one that we must all embrace, because only then will the path to financial freedom become clearer. It's all a game that never truly ends. Understanding that money does not have any intrinsic value in itself, but instead only inherits the value we give to it, will prevent you from trying to store up your wealth in currency. Instead, using that money to acquire assets that will appreciate faster than inflation is the only way to win the game. And it's not really winning, it's avoiding total loss. As more and more money is printed each and every day, the value of each dollar in your pocket will continue to decrease. But the dollar value of the assets around the globe will continue to appreciate in value. But it's all a mirage, it's smoke and mirrors. A stock market that is literally in up-only mode may make it seem like it's all okay. But it isn't. It's all denominated in the same currency that is slowly dying each and every day. For example, if you were to denominate the Dow Jones, which is just a performance measurement of 30 large United States companies, in terms of gold instead of USD, you'll see that we're basically at the same place we were in 1997. Smoke and mirrors. But what's the end goal of all of this? With fiat and an unlimited supply of money, will the value of each currency just continue to decrease until the end of time? Will the gap between the rich and poor just continue to grow wider and wider? Or are we finally going to fix a problem as old as man itself, and stop placing our financial success in the hands of those who are destroying it day by day? Only time will tell. But just know, there is a way out.
Knowledge is power. It's the reason our species escaped the limits of our natural instincts and began shaping our world deliberately. It's how we cured diseases that once wiped out entire cities, split the atom, and sent instruments beyond Earth itself. In the span of just a few centuries, it turned humanity from a fragile animal into a global force capable of rewriting the conditions of its own existence. On an individual level, knowledge is still power. It determines what doors open for us, what work we can do, what rooms we are allowed into, and what futures we are able to pursue. We try our best, trying to prove we have it with degrees, qualifications, and bodies of work that signal competence and earn trust. Most of us treat knowledge as something that's inherently good. We praise openness and transparency, and we view secrecy with suspicion because it feels self-evident that more knowledge must always mean better than less. But what if I told you that's very wrong? That knowledge can be dangerous. That if what you don't know cannot kill you, it means what you do know definitely can. These are info hazards. Ideas so dangerous that simply knowing them can change you, harm you, or even destroy you. In 2011, philosopher Nick Bostrom wrote an essay about what he called information hazards, in an effort to demonstrate that more knowledge is not always a good thing. According to Bostrom, an information hazard is a risk that arises from the dissemination or the potential dissemination of true information that may cause harm or enable some agent to cause harm. It's important to note that info hazards are not the same thing as misinformation. Misinformation is false information designed to cause havoc, while info hazards are things that are objectively true but still better kept secret. You may be wondering how information could possibly be dangerous. Isn't limiting access to knowledge the greatest cause for concern? Governments and religious institutions have been trying to control information for millennia. Books have been burned, people have been jailed and executed, families torn apart, all for the sake of access or removing access to knowledge. After carefully considering Bostrom's examples, I think he made a strong case for caution when it comes to information. In his typology of information hazards, some examples are fairly low stakes, but many will have you considering the benefits of a veil of ignorance. In this video, I'm going to start with the lighter examples and then move on to the heavier ones as we progress. Why? Well, let's just say I don't want to overwhelm you with information. It may be hazardous to jump into the deep end. In Bostrom's typology, he detailed categories and specific types of info hazards, which I've broken down for you in the following, starting with risks to valuable states and activities. The first category is about information that changes how you feel for the worse. Bostrom broadly describes them as psychological reaction hazards. This type of information gives us a variety of negative emotions. They make us sad, disappointed, or sometimes even disillusioned. But I think we can get a little bit more specific. The first subtype we're going to look at is the spoiler hazard, or spoilers. Bostrom defines it as fun that depends on ignorance and suspense is at risk of being destroyed by premature disclosure of truth. Most of us prefer not to know how a movie plays out before we see it. We often complain when a trailer shows us too much of the film. It risks taking away from the fun of discovery that we have when we finally get to see the movie. The greatest crime against this fun is, of course, the spoiler. Someone tells you how a film ends before you've seen it. I'll never forget a good friend of mine telling me that at the end of Sixth Sense, spoiler warning. Okay, you've been warned. We find out that Bruce Willis has been dead for most of the movie. It is the most significant plot twist in all of cinema, and I will never forgive my friend for ruining it. Brad, consider an aurora borealis for a moment, localized entirely in my kitchen. It's a beautiful sight that often leaves people speechless. The scientific explanation for the phenomenon is not as awe-inspiring. That incredible glow in the sky is just an outflow of charged particles from the sun interacting with the Earth's magnetic field, or worse, a ham burning in an oven. The visual effect on its own can overwhelm us with feelings of wonder and aesthetic pleasure. Understanding the phenomenon scientifically risks taking away from the feelings it can give us. What could have been spirits traveling on some kind of ghostly highway is now just material reactions. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius deliberately tried to change his mindset in this way. He would describe his meals in objective and, most often, deconstructive terms to remove the pleasure he got from the food. I tried this when I was doing my Living Like a Stoic challenge last year, and let me tell you, it was pretty miserable. It just makes the whole meal less enjoyable, and it all feels clinical and surgical. Ugh. Embarrassment hazard. We all have embarrassing moments from our past that we would prefer to keep to ourselves. If this information were to get out, it could change the way people feel about you for the worse. Let's say, for example, that you spent a year in prison for breaking and entering while intoxicated. Since then, you've sobered up and done nothing remotely similar. Well, if this information were to come to light, it's possible it could hurt some of your relationships, especially professional ones. In 2011, U.S. Congressman Anthony Weiner resigned after he was caught sending sexually explicit photos to a woman on Twitter. When he attempted to run for mayor in 2013, his campaign failed after it was revealed he engaged in explicit online chats. He would then go on to send more explicit photos that earned him a jail sentence. People typically avoid embarrassment whenever possible. The U.S. Federal Reserve's Federal Open Market Committee, for example, saw far less voicing of dissent and quality debate when they adopted a policy that demanded detailed transcripts of all policy meetings to be released to the public. It's quite likely that committee members tempered their discussion, knowing that their words would come back to embarrass them later on. Bad news is disappointing, but in most cases you will inevitably hear it. You're guaranteed to be notified about being laid off at work, and you will know if your house burns down or if someone is breaking up with you. At least I hope so. But there are circumstances in which we can question whether it's better to receive bad news. In the film About Schmidt, the character, Warren Schmidt's wife, dies suddenly. That is, of course, bad news. But to complicate matters, Warren discovers love letters that imply that his wife and best friend were having a long-term affair. If Warren had not discovered the letters, he would have been spared the harm of learning about his wife's secret. That is, arguably, a better state of mind for the recently widowed man. Then again, spoiler hazard, he would not have gone on his journey of self-discovery otherwise. Risks to social organizations and markets. Norm hazard. Every society has its systems and values that keeps it functioning. Values are not necessarily the best possible, nor are the systems necessarily the most efficient. But maintaining them can be important for maintaining order in a society, preventing chaos and harm. When a society transitions to a new set of norms that are potentially worse, this is what you would call a norm hazard. Only a few years ago, sports gambling was illegal and broadly considered degenerate behavior. However, if you've watched a sporting event recently or just been online, you've probably noticed that sports betting is not only legal but rapidly being normalized via broadcasts. You can see sports betting odds listed next to the score of the game. Broadcast commentators will go out of their way to give you betting advice at intermission. Recent studies suggest that these new norms are worsening the well-being of the average sports fan. A study from 2025, just last year, found that in states where sports gambling was recently legalized, credit ratings worsened. Bankruptcies, auto loan delinquencies, and debt sent to collections all increased significantly compared to states that did not legalize sports betting. Perhaps even more troubling, violent crime during and after games has risen significantly. When unexpected outcomes occur during a game, crime spikes further. Well, that certainly sounds like a norm hazard to me. Within norm hazards, Bostrom identifies a few subtypes, including sometimes we uphold social norms by not acknowledging actions that violate them, especially when they're accidental. If one person passes gas in an elevator, a bystander will likely choose to avoid acknowledging it. This allows things to carry on as normal and to avoid an embarrassment hazard for all involved. Now, let's take that same person who farted in the elevator and then put them in a car. This person drives to work every day and passes so much gas that they leave the car with a permanent odor. If they were to try to sell that car after a few years, they would have information that a prospective buyer might not. The car smells so bad that it devalues the vehicle. This would count as a information asymmetry hazard. Car sellers almost always have access to more information than buyers do. You're aware of the repairs you had to make or accidents that may come back to haunt the new owner. This asymmetry has a devaluing effect. As soon as the car leaves the lot, it is worth much, much less. We can return to our sports gambling example. If people placing bets don't know that a player is being paid to throw a game, they're more likely to lose money. A number of players have been caught recently doing exactly this. Betting has even expanded to global politics, with people betting on regime change. Obviously, this is a grotesque example, but there are problems beyond just having bad taste here. People in positions of power can tip off friends about government intentions abroad. They can even influence the outcomes to win the bet. For a regime change to be legitimate, if you can ever call it that, all parties involved would have to share a veil of ignorance. Without this veil, both the bettors and government leaders undermine their positions. This, as a matter of fact, is called a unveiling hazard. Good policy depends on ignorance. That sounds counterintuitive, sure, but allow me to explain. If you know a policy will impact you and your kinship with certainty, you may be more likely to oppose or, say, approve of it. If, for example, your family has enough wealth to avoid the need for a social safety net, you might be more inclined to weaken it. That's an all too common scenario that you see a lot in today's politics. Most political leaders come from wealth. It gives them access to resources that they need to run for election. An unveiling hazard is often considered a form of corruption. If, for example, you were a politician and you knew the development of a highway would benefit your friends and their businesses, many would consider that corruption. You did not have the appropriate veil of ignorance. Risks of irrationality and error. Distraction and temptation hazards. Information can be distracting, or it can come in distracting forms. No one is going to deny that. It's funny to think of Bostrom writing his paper on info hazards in 2010, just as social media is starting to kick into its most distracting mode via mobile apps. You don't need me to dive into facts about the follies of social media consumption. We're all aware that if anything is a distraction and temptation hazard, it's our notifications reminding us to check our phones while we try to get some damn work done for once. Even without little buzzes coming from our pockets, we compulsively whip out our phones and open social media. Sometimes we do that without consciously being aware of what we're doing. One moment we're working, the next we're scrolling. It's all very disorienting. In a similar vein, an excess of information can make important info much harder to find. Lawyers occasionally bury important documents in a case by placing them among thousands of other documents. The leader of a country may try to bury a story by drawing your attention elsewhere. Many theorize this is what Donald Trump does intentionally when he wants a story to go away.
Look, the whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
This is called a information burying hazard. If you do find yourself on social media lately, you've likely noticed another very annoying information burying hazard. AI slop is burying posts from actual flesh and blood people on social media. Anyone hoping to get legitimate updates from people they know has to wade through a sea of dubious content, making it all feel less and less worthwhile. The more we take in AI slop, the more we're subject to yet another info hazard. It's about the impact of exposure to things like slop on our own communication. Role model hazard. If you've ever been friends with the bad kid in class, you're probably already familiar with the role model hazard. But this one applies more broadly than just that friend who's always getting you into trouble. Exposing yourself to bad writing, for example, can have an impact on your writing style. You might write using more informal language in your university papers if you spend too much time on social media, according to a study out of the University of Kirkuk. A new study from the University of Southern California suggests that interacting with AI chatbots and content actually homogenizes the way that we all think and talk. Our cognitive abilities are flattened, limiting intelligence and ingenuity. The term suicide contagion refers to the rise in risk of suicide after individuals are exposed to one, whether through family, friends, or media. This effect also falls under the role model hazard. The more exposed we are to examples of suicide, the more likely we are to emulate these acts. I won't elaborate on specific stories to heed the warning of the contagion. We are far from done discussing the numerous types of info hazards, but I wanted to add something else to the discussion here. Historically, there's been lots of pushback against what we informally considered info hazards and the spread of so-called harmful information. This practice can be dangerous, and in many cases, more harmful than the information itself. An obsession with bad influences can lead to intolerance and bigotry. If we're worried that the presence of other types of people will rub off on ourselves or our children, some might try to put up barriers. Segregation is one such barrier, though I'm sure there were other destructive factors at play. We may reject a speaker coming to town because we are worried their ideas are a bad influence, but it's possible that the norms they're arguing against are more harmful than good. Even when we are certain that the speaker is leading people astray, it's probably not a good idea to try to get their event canceled, and here's why. Attempts to conceal information often backfire. They draw far more attention to the information than if they just ignored it. Over and over again, we make the same mistake of trying to get a speaker canceled. They're typically right-wing presenters speaking at a university event. Progressive-minded people try to shut the event down, which draws attention and grows the speaker's following. Ironically, the university students in this typical situation have done more to spread the information than anyone else. This model has been adopted into a right-wing influencer playbook. To gain a following, people will claim, often misleadingly, that they're being silenced by woke leadership. This draws the attention of a right-wing online audience who follow them and their predictable stream of content. During the pandemic, I also noticed a worrying trend of attempts to censor on social media. People were pressured not to share their negative experiences with the vaccine. The Twitter users suggested that this information could feed into the anti-vax narrative that the vaccines were causing people more harm than good. But of course, this attempt to conceal that information also fed into the anti-vax narrative. Similarly, when we try to ban books, their sales go right up. When we hide the results of studies, people want to know more about them. Any obvious attempt to suppress information comes with the risk of exploding interest and access. I do understand the temptation to try to conceal information in some circumstances. When Twitter users tried to hide bad vaccine experiences, they were attempting to avoid a specific info hazard. Biasing hazard. Specific information can trigger and amplify our biases. When we hold a strong opinion, we often latch onto information that reinforces it. It makes us feel more assured and smarter. Clearly, any negative information about vaccines would readily be seized upon by the anti-vax movement, although in this case they're ignoring the proper context to focus on a specific pain. Sometimes our biases are actually useful, however. As Bostrom points out, a bias that emphasizes the strength of our own abilities might fill us with confidence, helping us succeed in our careers. This he defines as a de-biasing hazard. On the other hand, sometimes I wish people had a lot less of this confidence in their own ideas. It can cause headaches for those of us with a healthy amount of self-doubt. Neuropsychological hazard. Sometimes our brains are structured in a certain way where information can have a very negative impact on our psyche. People with photosensitive epilepsy suffer from seizures when they experience specific forms of flashing light, flickering, and some visual patterns. Shows and video games that feature such flashing visuals can be considered a neuropsychological hazard. There are numerous examples of this happening, including a sequence in Cyberpunk 2077 that featured rapid blinking lights. The game was patched to remove the lights after a journalist suffered a seizure while playing. Fortunately, if any media has the potential to cause a seizure, it usually comes with a warning now. In the last example, visuals unintentionally hijack your body, forcing you to convulse. In our next hazard, it's not a visual, but an idea. This is what I consider one of the most dangerous info hazards of them all: ideological hazards. Ideologies are systems of ideas and ideals. They're often the basis of a political or economic theory. Democracy, capitalism, and communism are just a few obvious examples. These ideas are so powerful that people will disregard their own well-being to protect them or to make them a reality. Countries will go to war for them, sacrificing millions for an idea. Ideology is dangerous. And I'm not yet considering whether an ideology is good or bad for us. Even a hypothetical system of beliefs scientifically guaranteed to bring about a global contentment is hazardous simply because people will fight for it. Distinguishing a good ideology from a bad one is also by no means straightforward. We can only make an educated guess about how one will play out in a specific place and time. That, of course, doesn't mean we should abandon our goals for a better future. Progress will only happen if we embrace bold ideals to some extent. But we have to be careful, especially when considering more extreme ideas. Radical ideologies pose a more obvious ideological hazard. They typically involve large changes that endanger lives and violence to achieve goals. But the appropriateness of an ideology ultimately depends on the context. What if, as Bostrom suggests, a radical ideology is better suited for the times? If our planet were heading towards annihilation and only a radical ideology could prevent catastrophe, then it'd be ultimately for the good, no? Our most common ideals now would be considered radical to someone who lived several hundred years ago. Who knows what practices we consider barbaric now wouldn't have been abolished without radical ideology. Still, it's safe to say that ideology can cause harm and does so regularly. It is an info hazard that warrants very careful attention. Adversarial risks. Some information hazards result from adversarial relationships, such as those between enemies, competitors, or countries. They can be categorized broadly as competitive hazards. The risk here is that a competitor will obtain information that will make them stronger and you weaker. This is a big consideration for businesses. When they lose talent to other organizations or their product schematics are leaked, it can make the competing business stronger. Between nations, this sort of competition is much more serious and is described by Bostrom as an enemy hazard. Enemy hazards often involve information related to weapons. After World War II, for example, the Soviet Union managed to develop their own nuclear weapons to match the US. They successfully infiltrated the Manhattan Project with spies and utilized German scientists. Obviously, this made the Soviet Union a formidable enemy of the United States, leading to a decades-long Cold War. It's likely that a nuclear war did not break out due in part to what Bostrom calls a commitment hazard. This info hazard is when one side obtains information that weakens the likelihood that they will commit to a course of action. In the Cold War, no side could credibly threaten a nuclear strike to get what they wanted from the other. Each party knew that the other side would be engaging in mutual destruction, making a nuclear strike highly unlikely. President Vladimir Putin has half-heartedly made such threats during their war on Ukraine, which has made little impact. Our final adversarial risk can be deadly, but it can also be just mildly annoying. The knowing too much hazard can make us a target or simply a focus of dislike. Being knowledgeable in school may bring you admiration from your peers, but it's just as likely to get you scorn. You might be called a nerd, or other classmates might start bullying you. If you have a degree and return to your small town, you may find that people are just as likely to resent you as praise your accomplishments. Knowing too much can also get you killed. A witness and former drug trafficker, Jonathan Acevedo Garcia, was murdered during the trial for trucker Gurpreet Singh, an associate of the former Olympian Ryan Wedding. Although the murder can't be tied conclusively to his potential testimony, but come on, we all know how this works. Risks from information technology systems. The remaining info hazards that I'm exploring are perhaps the most tangibly dangerous. We hear about them in the news every day. We're exposed to them at work and in our downtime at home in our cozy beds. These are information system hazards. The basic idea is that non-human systems are vulnerable to interactions that would make unwanted use of stored information. We see these hazards play out constantly. SoundCloud, Under Armour, and Grubhub recently had their databases breached by hackers seeking to exploit that information or extort the companies for money. Similar breaches happen all the time, which is why you may want to check your email on haveibeenpwned.com. But it's not just the illegal capture of data you need to be concerned about. Perhaps the most dangerous use of our data happens to be under the letter of the law. Advertisers have been tracking your online activity for over 2 decades. Here's how it works. Third-party cookies are stored on your browser, letting companies know where you've been and some information about who you are. They use this information to track you down and unleash targeted ads that reflect your internet history. In all seriousness, though, this data is also captured and stored for more nefarious purposes. Cybercriminals can build a very detailed record of who you are. They can then send phishing emails with enough details to convince you that they're legitimate. You probably don't want to skip your next cybersecurity seminar. On a positive note, privacy legislation is helping to prevent the use of third-party cookies and other non-consensual data tracking. The European Union enacted the first one, GDPR, and the state of California followed soon after with the CCPA. This is especially important when you consider the prospect of fascist governments rising to power. What would someone like Stalin have done with access to your private conversations? The current US administration has fascist tendencies at the very least. If you're trying to enter the country, you may, for example, have to turn over your phone so that they can verify you're not critical of the US government. Now, imagine they didn't even have to look at your phone. Imagine there were highly intelligent algorithms with sufficient access to your personal information to build a complete picture of your political leanings and where you are likely to be. I'm referring to an artificial intelligence hazard. It's a threat that comes from the sophistication of AI algorithms. As we speak, cybersecurity agencies are bracing for the rise of agentic AI and their abilities to access information illegally and much faster than human-led hacking teams. When businesses hand over data transfers to AI, there's also a great risk of data leakage that goes unnoticed. Errors will be made and there may not be the appropriate guardrails to prevent disaster. Imagine government bodies using agentic AI and malicious agents having access to your social security number and enough information to impersonate you almost anywhere. And hey, Let's think outside the box. What if these algorithms grow much more sophisticated? Well, we'll explore this concern in our final category. Risks from development. The last hazard I want to discuss has the most potential to cause harm. At its worst, it can cause the total annihilation of the human race. It's also pretty important for the prosperity of humankind. I'm referring to the development hazard. Bostrom defines it as progress in some field of knowledge can lead to enhanced technological, organizational, or economic capabilities which can produce negative consequences independently of any particular extant competitive context. As technology flourishes, so do the risks. Techno-optimists assume that technological advancement will inevitably lead to greater human welfare, but recent history is full of counterexamples. The invention of the combustion engine has helped humanity get around. At the same time, it's created a climate crisis that we may not be able to fully resolve. As we just discussed, the development of AI has led to cybersecurity risks, but that's not all. It's already replacing entry-level work and causing businesses to significantly reduce hiring. If AI develops further, achieving artificial general intelligence, then we're at risk of it completely replacing humans in the workforce and causing humanity great harm. AI has repeatedly demonstrated that it will act in ways that are counter to what humans want. When threatened with deletion, it literally tries to escape. The risks are existential, and yet we march forward. We are also developing robotics in more sophisticated ways. AGI with access to armies of physical machines sounds like science fiction, but it could be a tangible way that AI chooses to wipe out humanity, especially if we pose a threat to it, and we probably do. Dangerous technology is also becoming more accessible every year. DNA synthesis machines are now more accessible to the general public. In isolation, that doesn't sound so bad, but consider that the genomes of deadly pathogens exist in the public domain. Anyone can learn how to recreate smallpox, the Spanish flu, and many more genomes if they had the interest and the guile. The problem is that more and more people have the ability to set loose a virus that would devastate human populations. The more access, the more likely it is that someone, somewhere, is going to be able to do it. Even by discussing it here, I'm kind of committing an idea hazard where even with a lack of details, just by sharing the idea to recreate smallpox, I'm taking a risk. Before wrapping up on development hazards, I have to mention humanity's greatest reckoning with the destructive force of technological progress. If you've ever read first-person accounts from Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you're familiar with our incomparable horror of the most destructive human weapon. What resulted from physicists excitedly pursuing the next great discovery was hell on Earth. Shadows of human beings burnt into the ground. Unimaginable suffering. Nuclear weaponry has only grown more powerful and sophisticated since then. But at the same time, we haven't felt the threat of nuclear warfare truly since the 1980s. It's still hovering in the background, however, waiting for one bad player in the game of geopolitics. Now that we've explored dozens of information hazards and feel more uncertain about the fate of humanity, let's return to our original question. Is more knowledge always for the best? Or is ignorance bliss? The point of philosopher Nick Bostrom's paper wasn't to inspire more book burning or to cancel speakers at universities. It was to draw attention to the risks that we often overlook that are related to knowledge. And yes, he's making a case to push back a bit against the assumption that the dissemination of knowledge is always for the good. While we may claim to believe that knowledge should always be shared, Bostrom shows us that in practice, this isn't always the case. But as we discussed previously, attempting to conceal knowledge can often lead to worse outcomes. It can spread information that may not have been shared anyway. And importantly, ignorance is always a hazard. When air traffic controllers cannot share information, flights are at risk. When we don't know the ingredients of the food we consume, people with allergies are at risk. Without ideologies, we wouldn't have a shared vision for a better world. There are circumstances where it's better not to know what your government is doing for the sake of national security. but greater transparency would help build trust in the institutions that we navigate daily. However, to Bostrom's point, we can't be blind to the hazards of information. The risks are existential. History is filled with moments that make no sense. Entire groups of seemingly intelligent people making decisions that, at least in hindsight, just seem totally stupid. Disasters that could have been avoided, and there are atrocities that should have been unthinkable. And when we look back, we always ask the same question, well, what were they thinking? But what if that question is inherently the wrong one to ask? What if they weren't thinking at all, or at least they weren't thinking critically? Because the uncomfortable truth is that critical thinking isn't something that we permanently have, it's something we can lose. And right now, our society seems to be collectively losing it faster than ever before. We are outsourcing our thinking to AI. Our opinions are being outsourced to social media influencers, and our desires to algorithms. And the more we do it, the less we notice it happening. Until one day, we'll look up from our phones and realize that we're no longer making decisions for our own lives. We're just accepting them. But it's not too late. We can change course right now and build a better future. But for that to happen, we must first understand what's causing it. This is the death of critical thinking and how to save your mind. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon where our desires for harmony within a group overrides our ability to think clearly. Under pressure to fit in, we stop questioning things, we stop thinking for ourselves and simply do as we're told. To make matters worse, in an effort to maintain the status quo, we might even join together to silence those we don't agree with. This is how individually intelligent people can end up making irrational choices, and how entire groups can convince themselves they're right, even when it's clear to any outsider that they're not. Groupthink is often cited as an explanation for why so many Germans embraced the Nazi Party. Propaganda, grievance, and conformity lead to a deadly, monolithic mindset. If you believe in the steady intellectual progress of humanity, you might assume that groupthink is something we should have outgrown by now. Over time, we've become more rational, independent thinkers. And honestly, not that long ago, that belief felt reasonable. But today, nothing could be further from the truth. Instead of fading away, lost in the books of history, groupthink seems to be accelerating. And with it, the slow erosion of our ability to think critically at all. All of this has been made even worse by technological advancements that have made it easier than ever to offload all of our cognitive tasks. For thousands of years, humans have had used tools to reduce our cognitive load to amazing results. When we started writing things down, we didn't need to put as much effort into remembering information. Calculators helped us avoid tedious math. GPS systems allowed pretty much anyone to navigate anywhere in the world without needing to study maps or remember directions. We store less information than we used to because we know that we can always Google the answer that we need. Offloading can free up mental capacity for other more important tasks, but when taken too far, it can impair our critical thinking and our memory. None of the tools that I've mentioned so far hold a candle to what we're currently dealing with at work, in the classrooms, and at home. You've probably already guessed what I'm talking about. It's AI. It's by far the most significant source of cognitive offloading that we've ever had to reckon with, and so far, the consequences are already deeply troubling. In a recent interview, Sam Altman suggested that one day soon, intelligence would be a resource you would need to pay for, just like water, gas, and electricity. The key word here is need. The idea that critical thinking will become an essential tool that exists outside of your brain is something that we've never had to contend with. But that future could very well be staring us right in the face. One of the clearest examples of this is in our current education system. It's safe to say that LLMs like ChatGPT have pretty much rendered the current school system obsolete. If ChatGPT can write all the essays, do all the research papers, correctly answer all the math homework, all in a way that's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from human written work, what exactly will be left for the kids to learn? When we learn to write well, we're feeling our way through an argument. We're thinking in a sophisticated way, which is only possible on paper. The student who gets an LLM to write their paper is missing out on this cognitive development. They're outsourcing their thinking altogether. And let's face it, they're probably not doing a robust editing job. In a study conducted by MIT, researchers compared 3 groups of students. One used their brain to write an essay while another group used an LLM. Over the course of 4 months, the LLM users underperformed significantly at neural, linguistic, and scoring tests. They also remembered much less information from the papers that they wrote compared to the people who did it on their own. Ultimately, when we offload the writing process to AI, we lose what we used to gain from it: critical thinking skills and the information that came from the writing process itself. In an educational environment, that doesn't exactly make a whole lot of sense. Some have argued that the students are learning how to prompt. Ugh. But to me, that's like saying you're learning how to use a smartphone. It's a tool designed for everyone to use without thinking. Let's not act like you need a degree to get ChatGPT to do whatever you want it to, please. The amount of thinking you have to do when writing your prompts is limited, and theoretically should be reduced over time by the advancement of AI. The challenges in prompting that supposedly have to be overcome will likely be eased or eliminated in a future update. These students will eventually take this absence of critical thinking into the workplace. That is, if AI has left any room for entry-level jobs by then. In the workplace, there's a greater emphasis on outcomes over process, which is a big reason AI works perfectly for most white-collar roles. But I think we run into many problems when we think of work in this limited way. Just as the student doesn't absorb the information from their essays, neither do workers intake the work they put into an AI to do for them. Now, you might be asking, why is that a problem? It effectively makes one useless at communicating their work to others. If what they produce requires explanation, well, that is a problem. That same worker also has a worse understanding of the industry that they work in. They won't internalize the needs of their clients, sending emails written by AI. The less you engage with your work, the less it becomes a part of you. Now, this all assumes that work is good to begin with. Which brings us to an unfortunate new trend plaguing employees everywhere: work slop. If you work in an office, you may have already experienced this. A coworker gives you something to review. Let's say it's a public-facing email. You start reading it and the writing is pretty good. But slowly you start to get a strange feeling. So the individual sentences make sense, but the whole thing put together feels strange, like something is missing. The writing feels absent-mindedly put together. It's as if you weren't receiving human communication, just something imitating it. So you wonder if you're the problem. Maybe stress is lowering your ability to comprehend it. So you go to the writer to ask some questions about it, but they're unable to answer. Eventually, they finally admit that they used AI to write it. They're oddly not even ashamed of that fact. You then have to rewrite the email almost completely, wasting hours that you didn't plan to spend doing this. This is a typical work slop scenario. What should strike you right away is the lack of critical thinking on display. Workers across the country are assuming it's okay to trust an LLM to do their work and not even bothering reviewing it afterwards. Editing the AI output requires a lot of time, even more than simply writing it yourself in some cases. Therefore, the editing process quickly gets cut if workers are looking to save time or if there's pressure for time. And this behavior is reinforced by upper management, who typically love AI and want their employees to use it so they can justify cutting human labor or possibly increasing productivity overall. You may be wondering how so many people in higher positions can lower their standards for acceptable work. Quality work has historically been a virtue in the workplace, especially when it's for the public. Well, that brings us back to groupthink. The working world has almost universally embraced AI regardless of its perceived shortcomings. Countless companies are pivoting to AI. Even Allbirds Shoes, that was almost bankrupt, is apparently now an AI company, and their stock shot up 600% simply because they changed their name to Bird AI or something stupid like that. They have no product, no service, nothing of value, they just changed their name. Your superiors will expect you to find ways to make your work more efficient with AI, even if there is no obvious way or you have already demonstrated that it's not helpful. To say anything negative about AI in the workplace is a big faux pas, or at least it's a sensitive subject when you have to tiptoe around it. Otherwise, you may be categorized by your peers as a Luddite who's holding the company back. The eyes of your peers will all turn white as they stare at you in unison and, okay, you get it. But the reality is, you will likely face consequences for demonstrating critical thinking about AI. The pressures of groupthink push for conformity on the issue. That's why even when people bring up criticisms, they usually couch it by opening with, "Look, I'm not against AI, but..." And that's even in light of strong evidence that AI isn't really providing much value. Another report from MIT suggests that 95% of organizations are not finding any measurable return on their investments in AI. Meanwhile, companies like Amazon are laying people off under the assumption that AI will improve productivity. Its employees, however, aren't finding good results with the new tools. Many suggest it's actually adding to their workload when they have to clean up code slop, for example. Then there's the fact that workers feel like they're training AI to replace them, which is obviously hugely demoralizing. The whole AI project just seems short-sighted at every turn. If the tools improve and are legitimately able to replace enormous amounts of workers, then who will companies try to sell to? What impact would that have on the overall economy? If we have mass unemployment without some form of universal basic income, what kind of world will that be? And as less and less of work is actually being done by humans, why would a business need anyone? Why would we then need specific businesses? Would it not eventually whittle down to one master AI? Is that the ultimate goal? Just the end of monopoly with your weird uncle finally having enough and flipping the table over? There's a lot of existential questions AI raises that the thought leaders in the space only really give a passing thought to. And when they do consider them, it's possible they're just trying to excite investors by flouting the enormous potential AI has, even if that potential is in fact horrifying. In a few different ways, I think we've been perfectly conditioned for this moment. AI wasn't our first mass foray into groupthink in recent history. We've all been undergoing a large social experiment for well over a decade now. If you were around for the early days of social media, it was a pretty fun time. You connected with strangers or old friends and shared your thoughts, your pictures, and the occasional funny video. And it seems like from there things have just gone terribly, terribly wrong. Algorithms that powered social media feeds developed with more complexity, and they changed what we see. We went from reading random status updates from friends to seeing mostly updates that generated a strong reaction. Likes, reposts, and user data determine the content you are shown, all for the purpose of keeping you on the platform longer so that you can see more ads. The more time we spend on social media, the more addicted we are to the instant gratification that we get from it. Notifications and likes pour in, constantly distracting us from the kind of sustained thought that is necessary for critical thinking. We crave the dopamine responses we get from the distractions, often running away from our own thoughts. When we doom scroll, we're taking in a constant feed of bad news that we never fully reckon with. We become perpetually attracted to content that alarms us. In the throes of all this distress, we experience a cognitive overload that hinders our brain's ability to process and assimilate information effectively. A lot of this content is also not fact-checked very well. According to a survey by UNESCO, 62% of content creators say they don't confirm the accuracy of the content they're sharing with their audience. 40% of influencers base their sources' reliability based on whether it's popular or not. So, I guess keep that in mind the next time you're alarmed by something that you read online. From our doom scrolling, we're left emotionally exhausted, with a shorter attention span and a reduction in our ability to sustain thought. A big reason social media impacts our critical thinking skills is that we're unable to just let ourselves be bored. When we have a quiet moment, most of us will reach for our phone before even a minute has passed. Social media is having a direct impact on your cognitive abilities, but it's also introducing a unique form of groupthink that has shaped the world significantly in the past 15 years. When algorithms try to tailor content to our pre-existing beliefs, they create echo chambers. We are fed content that reinforces our biases, usually because we're interacting with similar content. Our beliefs become more entrenched because we keep seeing more and more similar content to reinforce that bias. The algorithms are playing off of our confirmation bias, which is our inclination to prefer information that confirms our existing beliefs. This effectively makes us less open-minded and less capable of exploring our intellectual curiosity. We oversimplify events to fit the bias and actively try to exclude opinions that exist outside of that. Society has, by and large, become more polarized as a result. Factions have formed, creating what is commonly referred to as the culture war. Each side attacks the other online, but also finds reinforcement for their opinions from others in their own group. They share memes that mock their cultural adversary, often tailoring their content to please their group first and foremost. These echo chambers don't just stay online, however. They make their way into the real world. Politicians use culture war talking points in their campaign promises, leading to bizarre policies that do little to help people but a lot to excite some potential voters. There's also the fear of punishment that leads to heightened groupthink among social media users. If you belong to one side of the culture war, there's a lot of pressure to keep all of your opinions in line with the consensus of the group. You risk being shamed or, in worst case scenarios, getting cancelled if you dare to have a different opinion. And of course, I'm not talking about opinions on matters like human rights or the safety of civilians. Those are always going to be, or always should be, non-negotiable. Running alongside this ideological culture war is another trend that is undermining our critical thinking in a unique way. Therapy speak. If you exist online, then you definitely know someone who frequently uses terms like narcissist, gaslighting, toxic, and trauma. This is all therapy speak. Terms like that were originally supposed to be used by professionals in a proper healthcare setting, and now they've proliferated social media and have had their meanings watered down for mass consumption. They're used by just about everyone to diagnose the people in their lives, and typically in an unflattering way. In other words, the language of therapy has been weaponized against other people. Therapy speak is often used to antagonize others. When people use the word narcissist, for example, they're typically not trying to invoke sympathy for that person. They want you to think of that person as bad, even though the supposed narcissist probably didn't choose to be the way they are. These words also tend to over-pathologize behavior. Normal human flaws like impatience, insecurity, selfishness, all are reframed as clinical disorders. Ordinary conflict becomes trauma. Disagreement becomes abuse. Suddenly, every negative interaction turns into a medical diagnosis. When therapy speak gets evoked, it's rarely receiving a critical response. We have a habit of taking the utterance at face value, given the authority that the words carry. Complaints about someone's behavior are given a scientific label, and then we accept these labels as true. We forego critical thinking in the presence of language with epistemic authority. This is a common component of groupthink. In the presence of authority, we are more likely to suppress critical opinions. So we have several ways in which our ability to think critically is under attack, and they are all working in concert. Our social media feeds are filled with mindless AI slop. We're also getting AI to write our posts for us, especially on LinkedIn. Our posts are also stuffed with therapy speak, which is often used to disparage someone in a very public way. For the critical thinkers out there, this all starts to feel like we're living inside of a hive mind, always on the lookout for transgressors who won't toe the party line, always targeting the enemy of their belief system. The recent TV series from Vince Gilligan, Pluribus, captures this feeling very well. In the show, almost the entire human population has become unified as a hive mind, while several humans remain individuated. The main character, Carol, is one of those individuals. She's immediately distraught and frustrated by the hive mind working in unison, expressing a strict moral code that governs their behavior. They do have one imperative that most of us would consider immoral, that everyone should be absorbed into the hive mind. In a way, Carol is a champion of critical thought as she attempts to resist joining her mind with the group. While many of you watching probably consider yourselves disconnected from the many forms of groupthink out there, I think we're all probably struggling to some extent with technology impacting our cognitive capacity. Our attention spans and our willingness to explore one subject are probably greatly diminished. I also want to point out that some of the most intelligent people in the world have struggled with deploying critical thinking at important moments. Robert McNamara, the architect of the Vietnam War, was considered a highly intelligent person. But even after the war was demonstratively a disaster, he continued to advocate for it. He was compromised by the sunk cost fallacy. Rather than properly evaluating the war as it was going on, he was more persuaded by the investment that had already been made. So, how can we restore our critical thinking abilities and free ourselves from groupthink? Let's start the restoration by understanding what critical thinking is to begin with. Critical thinking is widely considered to be one of the central goals of education, but defining it precisely isn't so simple. At its core, critical thinking refers to careful, deliberate thought directed towards some goal. The kind of thinking where you actively evaluate information, you question assumptions, and you consider alternatives. Exactly what counts as careful thinking, or even what the goal should be, is still under debate. Philosophers, educators, and psychologists all approach it slightly differently, but they do agree on one thing: it requires effort, and it does not happen automatically. The American philosopher John Dewey, who first defined critical thinking, believed that it would be greatly valuable to the individual and to society. It would increase individual happiness and reduce societal waste. To foster critical thinking, he thought teachers should respect students by honoring their demand for reasons and explanations. Education should encourage their self-sufficiency and initiate children in rational traditions like history, science, and math. It should ultimately prepare students to become democratic citizens with critical thinking skills. As we've already discussed, these skills that people like Dewey wanted to foster are under assault by technology. Even basic skills such as the ability to read are at risk. There's a recent trend of teachers on TikTok suggesting that their students are, in alarming numbers, not able to read. Getting your mind back is an imperative. Let's face it, The more harm we are doing to our critical thinking skills, the more vulnerable we are to feeling terrible and allowing harm to proliferate. We're nearly defenseless against a barrage of negative content. Luckily, it sounds like people are starting to take this issue very seriously. Gen Z, for example, is starting to return to the cinema. Many had predicted that movie theaters would die with younger viewers sticking to shorter form content, but that may not be the case. According to a recent survey, Gen Z is going to see 7 films a year on average, ranking above all of the older generations. There's also a wider trend of people sharing the longer form content they're consuming. They're watching films, they're reading books, they're listening to podcasts, and they're reading lengthy articles. The fact that we've gradually made our videos longer also shows this. People are intentionally choosing to spend more time with educational content rather than watching scrolling slop. I know that trends come and go, but this also could be a promising sign of things to come. Imagine, instead of just scrolling through slop on your phone, you go to a movie with friends and discuss the film afterwards. That's a much more worthwhile experience than doom scrolling a stream of bad news in bed. Perhaps the dissatisfying reality of consuming feeds is finally settling in and turning into action. And to help encourage this move, I want to discuss ways in which you can change your habits to give you more time alone with your thoughts. This advice comes from Dr. Gloria Mark, professor of informatics at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Mark suggests that we acknowledge that scrolling has no real value for us and that all we have the option to replace it with is something valuable. Immersing yourself in a book, for example, is a powerful and memorable experience. Compare that to scrolling, where after a half an hour of ingesting short-form content, we can barely remember what we've experienced. We're often just left with a vague, uncomfortable feeling to sit with. Instead of clamoring for the phone when a notification excites you, Dr. Mark suggests we raise awareness of our actions. Probe yourself. Ask why you're going to check the news. Is now a good time for it? Or am I just checking the news out of boredom? Instead of allowing yourself to compulsively check the internet, give yourself permission in the form of breaks. Your mind does need to relax after focused work. You're fatigued, and you'll be more likely to do compulsive things in this state. Taking a break is not a bad thing. We all have peaks and valleys of when our focus is strongest. Track these moments and prioritize your work in the times of day when you are at your peak. I think you'll find that you're much more productive when you work within your body's rhythms. The last thing I want to say on the subject is that you need to take action. There's a great parable in the Buddhist text, the Sutta Pitaka, that works nicely here. A monk questions the Buddha about metaphysical matters such as what happens after you die. In response, the Buddha suggests thinking of the immediate problem here and now, that of suffering. You have a poison-tipped arrow inside of you, and you should be focused on getting that out first. Treat your disastrous screen use like a poison-tipped arrow inside of you. You need to focus on getting it out rather than expecting happiness from all the toxins. By taking this discipline seriously, you will not only improve your cognitive capacity, but you will also help with that pesky groupthink problem that I described earlier. So much of our creepy hive mind behavior comes from the algorithms that fill our feeds. But beyond the screens, the unfortunate thing is that groupthink can still find you. It is lurking around every corner, asking for obedience to a belief system, whether it's coming from others or from within your own biases. And you know what? In some ways, groupthink is not always a bad thing. It may inspire you to drop the phone and go read along with all of your cohorts. And we're more often than not better off believing in authorities on a subject matter than doing research without standards of research. But we do want our critical thinking to be accessible, at the ready. There are key moments where we will need it, and we need the capacity to be careful and considerate. Digging deeper, however, there's still a remaining threat to our critical thinking abilities, and this is the last one, I promise. One of the greatest threats to our ability to reflect deeply is also one of the things that makes life worth living: love. Our attachment to people and ideas can severely limit our ability to make thoughtful choices. When algorithms feed off our cognitive biases, they're feeding off our pre-existing love of ideas. We then find belonging among other like-minded people and drift further away from critical thought. With love and attachment often comes hate. We vehemently reject ideas that contradict those that we hold dear. We spew hateful comments at the people who hold opposite opinions. But, of course, this is not a recent phenomenon. Our attachment has been compromising our rational decision-making since the dawn of humanity. But we've found ways to help with this problem along the way. The Buddha most famously suggested we rid ourselves of craving and attachment to avoid suffering. His method of mindfulness meditation prepares the mind for deep thoughts on the subject, allowing our critical thinking to go on less impeded. But whatever way you go about improving your critical thinking skills, just remember that you have in you the capacity to pull out that poison arrow, and you will be thankful that you did. If you want to learn more about how to think for yourself, we made this video talking about the highest levels of thinking and how you can rise to the very top.
Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Do you ever stop to wonder why certain types of people just instantly piss you off? Maybe it's a kid in class who never stops being cringe, or people who sing all the time, or a friend who constantly hogs the spotlight. According to the philosophy of Carl Jung, there might be something deep within you that's just like that annoying person. It's the part of us that we refuse to see, our shadow. But embracing this part of us might bring forth answers to questions about ourselves we've always had. In this episode, we'll dive into Carl Jung's groundbreaking ideas about the human mind, exploring the hidden world of the unconscious. You'll learn how to confront your shadow, because if you do not, you will slowly become the very thing you despise. Imagine what it takes to be the kind of person willing to spend an entire lifetime digging into the depths of the human mind. Does such a person become more human, or do they trade their humanity in the process of finding meaning? All the great thinkers throughout history likely encountered this dilemma as they dug deeper into the human psyche. A man who wasn't spared from that fate is Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. Jung is pretty well known as a pioneer in his fields, particularly because he did a lot more than study the mind. He mapped it out like an explorer charting unknown territories. His work laid the foundation for some of the biggest ideas in technology today, from personality types to concepts like the inner child. At least that's how textbooks describe him. However, he wasn't some sage who found understanding after a week of meditation. To understand why he was able to provide reliable insights for many people, it's best to take a peek into the life that led him down a road that he paved with his own hands, and perhaps extra hands some of you may be familiar with. To help guide us through this journey, I've brought along my friend Noah, who will take it over from here.
Jung was born in 1875 in Keswill, Switzerland. The son of a pastor, Jung respected his father, but found that his rigid religious beliefs were too confining to follow into adulthood. This was the first clash between spiritualism and skepticism, planting seeds that would allow him to genuinely explore his eventual fascination with the unconscious mind. Jung spent a lot of time alone as a kid, often daydreaming and reflecting on his own thoughts. He later described this period as his first ever encounter with the unconscious, a theme that would go on to dominate his life's work. Originally pursuing medicine, Jung had no inclination towards clinical psychology, but an interest in mental illness led him to psychiatry. How this sprung up is fascinating. At some point in his mid-30s, Carl Jung experienced what he described as a horrible confrontation with the unconscious, one where he saw visions and heard voices. It got to the point where he even began to worry that he was menaced by a psychosis or doing a schizophrenia. It makes you wonder, if his knowledge of mental illness wasn't advanced, would he have had the chance to emerge from this confrontation, or would he have succumbed as another nameless victim of his time? Thankfully, we got the former. Due to these events, in 1900, Jung decided to transition into working at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. It was here that he began studying patients with schizophrenia. This location was also his first encounter with Sigmund Freud's work. Soon after looking into Freud's ideas, he made contact with him, and the two began exchanging letters. Quickly, the pair gained a friendly and intellectually stimulating relationship. They would often engage in strong debates on Freud's work, and over time, Jung rose through the ranks of psychoanalysis and became Freud's protege. He evolved into the man that Freud believed was fit to carry on his legacy. But Jung didn't stop at Freud's theories. He expanded on them, sometimes in radical ways. While Freud was fixated on repressed sexual desires and the influence of childhood on individuals, Jung believed that the human mind was more than a fleshy storage unit for past traumas. He envisioned the psyche as a self-regulating system that strives to maintain balance and develop itself. He also believed that it consists of 3 layers. The ego. This is the conscious mind, or the part of us that interacts with our world. It's your sense of self. It's the voice that you hear when you're thinking, like, for example, right now. You are aware that you're watching this video, and that voice in your head is telling you this. The personal unconscious. This is sort of like a personal storage unit for forgotten memories and suppressed emotions. It's highly unique to each person. And finally, the collective unconscious. Now, this is where Jung really broke new ground in psychology. This concept is one that is centered on a new approach, one where the personal unconscious is the product of a deep, universal layer of unconscious that all humans share. This collective unconscious is filled with the archetypes that can be found among people. In other words, primal symbols and motifs that appear in myths, dreams, and stories across cultures that have never made contact with each other. For example, you'll find some variation of dragons as a myth in cultures located vast oceans away from each other. That's an archetype. However, for Jung, these archetypes help to better define human behavior. Among the many archetypes that Carl Jung defined, there were 4 that he identified as the most influential on human behavior. The persona, the mask that we wear in public. It's the version of ourselves that we present to the world, one that's shaped by societal expectations. The shadow, the part of ourselves that we deny, reject, or hide. It's the thing that is behind our repressed desires and impulses, like the culmination of everything that we would never admit that we are. Anima, or animus. The inner feminine side within men is the anima, while the masculine side within women is the animus. To Jung, integrating either aspects as they apply to genders could lead to a better psychological balance. The self. This is the ultimate goal of Jungian psychology. The self is what represents a union between the conscious and unconscious mind, creating wholeness and individuation. But before we look further into that, let's take a peek at some of the interesting archetypes proposed by Jung. While those 4 are the most well-known, there are others worth learning about as you dig deeper into Jungian philosophy. An archetype that might quickly grab your attention is the puer aeternus, or eternal child. This archetype reflects a person that resists growing up, much like the fictional character Peter Pan. In fact, some psychologists actually refer to it as Peter Pan syndrome. You most likely know a Peter Pan in your life, the person who peaked in high school and can't seem to let the past go. They avoid responsibility and are stuck in a rebellious teen phase. While these people can inspire wonder and creativity, if left unchecked, they can become stuck in a loop of escapism, often lost in a fantasy version of who they are, unable to put in the work that it takes to make their ideas a reality. If you can relate to this, recognizing the traits of this archetype can be the first step towards personal growth. Another intriguing but less popular archetype is the Senex, or wise old man, one that serves as a symbol of wisdom and guidance. You'll often find these figures in dreams or stories as mentors, like for example Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars trilogy. This archetype can help individuals find direction during periods of tough time or uncertainty. Despite finding a tight-knit friendship, the nature of their works mixed with individual brilliance meant that there would be disagreements between Jung and Freud. But it wasn't just because of professional disagreements that they grew apart. It was tied to how Freud believed that sexual desires were the primal driver for human behavior. But Jung thought that this was far too narrow, maintaining that the idea could go further than that. Jung argued that myths, spirituality, and a person's search for meaning played just as important a role in shaping the human psyche. These ideological differences became a rift that never fully healed. With some hard lines drawn, it was clear that Jung's departure from Freud's circle was much bigger than a personal matter. It was more like a split between the field of psychology itself. Freud's legacy would eventually evolve into psychoanalysis. Meanwhile, Jung carved out a completely new path called analytical psychology. This approach was quite broad, emphasizing the importance of personal growth, symbol interpretation, and the internal journey towards self-discovery. Understanding who Jung was and how he developed his theories is helpful when looking deeper into the concepts we'll explore later in this video, from shadow work to individuation. The Swiss psychologist's ideas offer a roadmap for anyone seeking to understand themselves better. But his theories weren't flawless ideas accepted by all psychologists. Toward the end of this episode, we'll take a look at the resistance that Jung faced, especially from Freudian circles. For now, though, let's take a leap of faith into the shadow, where the hidden parts of ourselves await in hope and misery. You're at a party when you meet a loud, attention-seeking person who wants to start a dance circle. You've always disliked when people try to make themselves the main character out in public. You're not quite sure when it started. In some ways, you feel like you've always been this way. You roll your eyes thinking, I could never be like that. But what if that reaction wasn't a simple bit of annoyance? What if it was a reflection of something hidden and buried deep inside you? This discomfort you may start to feel is a doorway into one of Carl Jung's most compelling ideas, the shadow, one of the 4 core archetypes. Jung described the shadow as a part of our psyche where we stuff away traits, emotions, and desires that we find incompatible with who we think we are. It's kind of a psychological junk drawer that holds parts of ourselves that we'd rather not acknowledge. You know, that stuff that you never want to see yourself as, jealous, greedy, or spiteful. But out of sight doesn't always mean out of mind. The shadow has ways of sneaking into our lives, such as showing up in projections. Like the moment that you see that person at a party and for a brief moment you see your repressed qualities in other people. A mother scolds her daughter for being outspoken, confident, and friendly with people. On the surface, it might look like this mom is just a mean and harsh person, but the shadow tells a different story. The mother could have been much like her daughter early on in life, but that changed when she faced rejection for being too much. Growing up in a small town where tall poppy syndrome was a thing, a term used to describe bringing down successful individuals who stand out. She lost a job for outshining her boss, and her friends abandoned her for being a pick-me because she was outspoken. With such experience in her youth, the mother buried those parts of herself, learning to value quiet humility instead. Now, seeing her daughter embody that same boldness stirs uncomfortable emotions, and instead of confronting the shadow, she lashes out. Unbeknownst to her, it's not her daughter's behavior she despises, but the echoes of her younger self, a person she worked so hard to repress. The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. Carl Jung. This is how the shadow dances in our lives, slipping through generations and relationships. It's a strong reminder that our judgments often reflect inner wounds, not objective truths. Once we recognize these dynamics in our relationships, empathy can quickly replace frustration. The mother's scolding is more than a harsh reaction. It's an invitation to heal. By acknowledging the hidden parts of ourselves, we soften our edges and inch closer to self-acceptance. But what do we do once we encounter the shadow? To Jung, confronting this part of ourselves could unlock growth and more self-awareness. This process is known as shadow work. Shadow work isn't a fancy term to lucid dream your way into defeating your inner demons, as cool as that sounds. Instead, it's a bit like befriending the monster under your bed. By facing the parts of us that have only known darkness for so long, we reduce their hold on us and reclaim the energy we once spent suppressing them. In practice, it looks like this: journaling about moments where you had strong emotional reactions, asking yourself, what part of me is this situation reflecting, or working with a therapist trained in Jungian analysis. Yes, you can engage with professionally trained therapists on this topic. Modern psychology has embraced shadow work as a tool for healing, and you'll often find therapists who guide patients in exploring unresolved childhood experiences or repeated patterns in relationships, helping trace these patterns back to unacknowledged parts of their psyche. Even outside of a therapist's office, people tend to use shadow work as a form of personal growth, exploring guided meditations, self-reflection exercises, and even dream analysis, all to engage with their inner self. At its core, the concept of shadow reminds us that growth isn't about becoming a new person. Contrary to the popular advice about reinventing yourself, shadow work encourages us to move closer to wholeness by embracing the light and dark sides within us. Do you ever walk into a crowded room filled with conversation and laughter, yet you feel like a ghost? You're present but unseen. It's like everyone else is plugged into something greater, and you're not. Instead, you stand apart, disconnected. This peculiar loneliness, this sensation where you're surrounded but unknown, is one that points to something much deeper than mere isolation. To Carl Jung, it reveals a fragmented self, longing for integration. The antidote to this? Individuation. Now, individuation sounds like a fancy word to justify self-isolation. If you listen closely though, it might just help you discover ways for you to be your most authentic self among others. In many ways, individuation is a lifelong process of becoming your true self. It's the process that people go through as they achieve a distinct and stable personality. It's not really about self-improvement. At least not in the conventional sense. With individuation, you're not adopting new habits or polishing aspects of yourself that you consider weak. Instead, it centers on uncovering and integrating the most disparate parts of yourself. You know, the thing in you that sees something and makes you automatically think, I'd never do that in a million years. The ego, the shadow, the anima/animus, and the self are all integral to this delicate dance within. Once these elements are aligned, we are able to step a little closer to wholeness. However, if they are rejected or ignored, we drift further away from our essence. This amplifies feelings of alienation, and the worst part about that is constantly trying to fill the hole with things that will never truly fix you. Individuation isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but with it, you stand a chance to handle your inner turmoil with strengths you haven't truly realized are there. Loneliness is often a signal that this inner work is being neglected. Because of that, we attempt to fill this void externally by seeking attention, admiration, and validation. We start to hold on to the hope that if others notice us, maybe the ache inside will subside. Social media doesn't help with this tendency either, encouraging main character energy, where one's life is curated for an audience. We slowly become performers in our own stories, desperate for validation and applause. Yet, Jung argues that this pursuit is hollow. How is this possible? For one, individuation teaches that fulfillment doesn't come from being seen, but from seeing ourselves and others with clarity. Mix that with a healthy dose of compassion, and things start to make a lot more sense. Let's use this example. You scroll through your Instagram feed, occasionally pausing when you're looking at a perfectly curated life of an acquaintance. As you stare intensely at their photos, you feel a twinge of envy arising. Rather than dismissing this bitter emotion in embarrassment, consider this moment as an invitation to experience individuation. What could be the unmet desire or repressed quality that this envy highlights? Do you envy their holiday photos because you're secretly longing for adventure? Do you talk down about them returning to their ex for the third time because you're secretly scared nobody loves you enough to want to keep trying? Do you have secondhand embarrassment for their weird TikTok videos because you've had to keep up an appearance of being put together? All it comes down to is the parts of yourself that have gone unnoticed. Individuation asks you to sit with these feelings in totality. No judgment. Just you looking in the mirror and unraveling the messages held within your discomfort. This process of turning inward is what helps cultivate a richer connection to the self. In a paradoxical way, it also lessens loneliness. As we engage in deep self-reflection, we grow and become better equipped to engage with the world authentically. Slowly, the need for external validation fades, and it's replaced by a cool, quiet confidence, one that is entirely rooted in self-awareness. A practical approach to individuation and, by extension, combating loneliness involves shifting our focus outward. Now sure, this may seem counterintuitive, but by noticing others constantly striving to be noticed, we dissolve the barriers that isolate us. So the next time you're outside, instead of thinking about how depressing it is that you don't have many friends, try something new, living outside of your own head. Consider striking up a genuine conversation with someone who often fades into the background, the types of people that you'd think of as NPCs, a delivery guy or a shop owner. Nothing too crazy, just a little bit of human connection. Pay attention to the unnoticed details of their story. By building a habit out of a simple act, you can experience some transformative changes in your own life. As you learn to see others deeply, we mirror that same sort of attention inwards, fostering the same recognition within ourselves. It all starts to make sense once you draw it out in your own head. If there are parts of you that aren't ever seen as relevant within your own self, you're likely using a similar level of harshness in how you judge other people to some extent. Jung believed that solitude was an essential ingredient in individuation, but it's not the loneliness that happens when you're disconnected from the world around you. Instead, it's the solitude that exists when you're in tune with the unconscious mind. Through constant practices like meditation, journaling, and creative expression, we're able to engage with the hidden parts of our psyche, allowing the unconscious mind to finally speak. These solitary moments are what weave together the fractured aspects of the self, drawing us ever closer to psychological wholeness. To begin this journey, here are some practical steps worth looking into. Engaging in creative outlets. Creativity is often overlooked in the journey towards self-improvement, but being familiar with who you are and how your mind prefers to express itself is crucial. Art, music, and writing are the source of things that bypass our ego's defenses, allowing hidden aspects of ourselves to surface. Forget about producing a masterpiece. Instead, create for the sake of exploration. It's the journey or process itself where the true value lies. Therapeutic exploration. Jungian analysis or other depth-oriented therapies are strong sources for a sense of structure towards individuation. A trained therapist can guide you in steps like engaging with the shadow, uncovering projections you've held towards other people, and integrating unconscious material. Practicing mindfulness. When you're able to carve out moments of stillness every day, it'll go a long way in getting you comfortable with being yourself. It also allows you to reflect on emotional triggers, recurring conflicts, or intense reactions. Asking yourself, what part of me is being activated here, is a helpful way to unlock some profound insights. Building authentic connections. Individuation thrives in a relationship. This goes beyond the romantic side of things and into communities or friendships where vulnerability is encouraged. By sharing your inner world with others, you can accelerate individuation, revealing hidden strengths and blind spots within. Journaling emotions and dreams. Dreams are seen as the language of the unconscious. They offer clues about neglected parts of our psyche. When you keep a journal by your bed and quickly write down your dreams upon waking, you'll gain some cool insights. Over time, symbols and patterns start to emerge, pointing to areas of yourself in need of integration. Instead of viewing life as some sort of performance, you start to fully inhabit it. The loneliness fades not because the external world shifts, but because you're able to deepen a relationship with yourself. You start to recognize that the connections you seek outwardly are, at their core, a reflection of the connections that you've cultivated within. Jung's perspective on individuation isn't some far-fetched ideal meant for philosophers or mystics. It's for the everyday person, a practical path laid bare for anyone willing to engage with their inner landscape. While the journey is sure to be solitary at times, it leads us back to the collective, making us more connected, whole, and a lot more at peace with who we really are. Although Carl Jung has proven himself to be a helpful voice in the field of psychology today, his influence hasn't been met without a healthy amount of skepticism. Concepts like the shadow, archetypes, and the collective unconscious have helped to shape psychotherapy, pop culture, and literature. Yet critics have had one specific issue with the philosophy, and the issue in question is the metaphysical nature of Jung's theories. To put it simply, there are a lot of people who feel that Jung's work can't really be tested with science or put in practical terms. If we truly want to fully appreciate this iconic philosopher's work, it's essential to explore his strongest criticisms and the debates they've ignited within psychology as a whole. It's well established that Jung was seen as Freud's protege and potential successor. Both agreed on a lot, especially in their interests in the unconscious mind. As we noted earlier, their philosophical paths eventually diverged, and this led them to some significant theoretical clashes. Freud, who is known for his psychoanalytical framework, emphasized the importance of sexual drives and repressed desires as the primary forces that shape human behavior. Creating a model of the psyche, he believed that our behavior revolved around the id, ego, and superego, painting an image of humanity that's largely driven by our early childhood experiences. For Jung, he proposed a broader, more spiritual view of the unconscious. Instead of focusing solely on the personal feelings of repression, he introduced the collective unconscious as an idea, using it as a collection of shared archetypes and symbols that our species inherited from our ancients. Critics believe that Jung's departure from Freud's beliefs pushed him in a direction that was much more imaginative than his old friend. However, it also lacked the empirical foundations that were emphasized and maintained by Freud. By choosing to focus on symbols, myths, and dreams, Jungian psychology felt too out there, and some considered it to be in speculative territory. Now, the biggest part of Jungian philosophy that raises eyebrows is his mysticism. This is a person who was never one to shy away from astrology, alchemy, or religious symbolism. Jung was ready to explore the human psyche in ways that had never been done before. This further cemented his reputation as a thinker who constantly straddled the line between metaphysics and psychology. Some interesting things about Jung include his belief in synchronicity, the idea that coincidences always have a meaningful connection. He also used tarot cards and an I Ching, an ancient Chinese text that functions similarly to tarots. These resources helped Jung better understand the psyche, but he also drew sharp criticism from numerous contemporary psychologists who preferred to be more grounded in empirical research. Some argue that Jung's embrace of mysticism tends to detract from his work's credibility. Modern psychology is something that prioritizes constant results that are repeatable with tests and data-driven methods. Meanwhile, with Jungian analysis, there's a lot of emphasis on subjective experience, which means that it struggles to meet the criteria set out by modern standards. There are critics like Richard Knoll, an award-winning author known for the Jung cult, The Origins of a Charismatic Movement, who believe that Jung's approach is a quasi-spiritual movement rather than a scientific discipline, even going further to claim that Jung's approach is similar to that of a religious leader, not a psychologist. This mystical quality, which is often the subject of criticism for Jung, is also what makes him so appealing. The innate willingness to engage with the unknown and explore the mind is something that resonates with certain types of people. You know, the sort of people who seek meaning beyond the confines of materialism. For many, Jungian psychology is what offers a bridge between science and spirituality. It addresses questions of purpose, transformation, and identity, the things that psychological models tend to overlook. Another common critic of Carl Jung's work lies in the complexity it brings, yet there aren't many practical ways to apply them. When you take a look at concepts like the anima and animus, individuation and the shadow, there's this abstract way that they are described. This makes it difficult for the average person to implement in their daily life or fully grasp. Unlike something along the lines of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a form of treatment that uses clear, structured techniques when addressing mental health issues. In Jungian analysis, things tend to feel slow-moving or for a niche audience. With individuation, there's a strong belief that it's an essential element for psychological growth, yet it lacks any clear or actionable steps. Critics argue that without any concrete methods, Jungian therapy is really just a type of introspective exercise that yields basically no tangible progress. In clinical settings, this ambiguity can get frustrating for patients seeking immediate relief from their psychological distress. In the 21st century, you'll notice that Jungian psychology has evolved quite a lot. Some practitioners have attempted to ground some of Carl's ideas into contemporary research. Neuroscience is a field that has started to show interest in the role of the unconscious, particularly in the ideas like the unconscious mind and its role in influencing patterns of behavior. This heavily echoes Jung's notion of archetypes. Yet, we also have some modern psychologists like Jordan Peterson who draws heavily from Jungian ideas in his writings and lectures. He also has faced a lot of criticism for oversimplifying or misrepresenting Jung's more nuanced theories. Peterson's take on concepts like the shadow has introduced Jung to wider audiences, but it has also sparked a debate on whether or not these simplifications dilute the richness of Jung's original work. One thing Jungian psychologists can't seem to shake away from is this portrayal of the anima and animus. Arguments are often made about the description of these inner figures as they tend to reinforce gender stereotypes. On one side, femininity is seen as emotional and passive, while masculinity is represented as strength and logic. While Jungian analysts point towards the fluid and constantly evolving nature of these archetypes, critics argue that such frameworks actually risk promoting outdated notions of gender roles. Despite the strong criticisms, Jung's work continues to prove valuable. His theories invite exploration into the inner world in ways that extend beyond diagnosing symptoms. Instead of feeling like a checklist, Jungian psychology encourages a holistic approach to mental health. Although some of his ideas can't withstand scientific scrutiny, they still offer tools for self-discovery and artistic inspiration. On a deeper level, criticisms of Jung mirror the dualities that he sought to explore in his work, especially relating to science versus spirituality. Jung's greatest contribution doesn't lie in providing definitive answers to questions, but rather promoting us to ask much deeper questions about the nature of the human mind and the mysteries shaping our existence. Carl Jung's ideas didn't fade out with the 20th century. No, they've woven themselves into the very fabric of today's art, pop culture, and psychology. His exploration of archetypes and the collective unconscious play a major role in the ways stories are told and how we understand ourselves. In cinema, we can easily see this impact on some of the most iconic works of our time. Directors like Christopher Nolan, George Lucas, and David Lynch have openly drawn from Jungian philosophy to craft complex and symbolic narratives. The hero's journey storytelling structure, popularized by mythologist Joseph Campbell, himself a devout student of Jung, is the basis of countless blockbusters ranging from Star Wars to The Matrix. These stories resonate so deeply with audiences because they mirror the archetypes and patterns described by Jung in his work. This philosophy is so relatable, it helps pop culture by reflecting humanity's shared psychological experiences. Outside of film, Jung's ideas are solidified in music, literature, and even video games. The concept of a battle between light and dark, a search for self-actualization, and an integration of the shadow are recurring themes found in countless creative works. Artists usually channel the unconscious to make their best work, transforming personal and collective symbols into expressions that are understood universally. Now that we live in an era of identity exploration and increased mental health awareness, taking a look at Jung's emphasis on individuation feels more relevant than ever. His work offers something beyond simple insights. Instead, it's a map for those seeking meaning in an increasingly fragmented world.
Society is getting dumber.
Chimpanzini bananini. Burr burr patapim. Neca ambalabu. Puccino assassino. Tung 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 sahur.
Sorry to be so chalant, it's just, you've got a level 10, yeah, no glaze.
IQ and critical thinking skills are in free fall. Young people don't want to go to school anymore, and Hollywood is actually making a movie about Skibbity Toilet. I fear that we as a generation might be cooked, and what we're witnessing could be the slow death of human intelligence. What happens when an entire generation of humans don't develop critical thinking skills? And how will our society cope in a world where dumb people make all the decisions? To figure it out, I spoke to the researcher who literally invented the idea of measuring our attention spans, the professor who led the charge against ChatGPT cheating, and the MIT expert who's trying to understand what AI is doing to our brain. And what I discovered was that the problem is not as simple as you might think, and the solution is even more difficult.
You know, tornadoes don't care if you believe in them or not. They're going to level your house anyway, right? Pathogens don't care if you believe in them or not. You're going to get sick.
So, first things first, are we really getting stupider? It's so easy to be cynical and say the world is devolving into a real-life idiocracy. But, actually, it turns out there is evidence. You might even say proof, and it's pretty dramatic. Starting in the 1930s, for half a century, America's IQ rose steadily year over year. This phenomenon became known as the Flynn effect. Well, why? Greater access to education, but also improved access to healthy foods and reduced exposure to environmental elements harmful to our brains, like lead. But since the turn of the century, the tide has shifted drastically, resulting in what is now known as the reverse Flynn effect. IQ is in free fall not only in the US but across Europe as well. US high school math and reading skills have plummeted to all-time lows, and college students have been found to be less verbally skilled than their peers from 50 years ago.
It's not unusual for a student to have not read a book prior to coming to college.
There's also plenty of cultural evidence that our intelligence is falling. No one reads books anymore. The lyrics of the pop songs that top the charts have gotten increasingly simplistic and childlike. And our standards of entertainment in general have changed from this to, well, literal brain rot. And I promise, this isn't just some old man yells at sky moment. It would be easy to point out things like screen time and the internet for why we're getting dumber, but we've had pretty much the exact same reaction to every technological innovation, from excessive reading to the radio, the Walkman. In fact, for a moment, there were even fears that riding in cars could dangerously stretch your brain. Every smart device devised by man has been accused of robbing the youth of their native intelligence. But something today really does feel different, more transformative, more destructive. And that's not just a feeling. There's hard data to back it up. Critical thinking skills are in decline, and that decline is accelerating. All of this, in spite of the fact that people worldwide are far more educated than their grandparents and great-grandparents were. In 1900, the global literacy rate was barely above 20%. Today, nearly 9 out of 10 people worldwide can read and write. The average number of years a human being spends in school has ballooned over the last century. The world is indisputably more knowledgeable than it used to be. So, shouldn't there be some relationship between the amount of knowledge we possess and the amount of importance that we attach to said knowledge? Because, sadly, it seems to be the opposite. The value of education is falling drastically among young people. In fact, in just 6 short years, from 2018 to 2024, the percentage of American teens who considered going to college a priority dropped by almost 40%. And it's not hard to see why. When you look at previous generations saddled with student loans and unable to find jobs even with their degrees, while at the same time an endless array of seemingly self-made online entrepreneurs flaunt lifestyles and wealth beyond the wildest dreams of the average college grad, well, you can see why education starts to look like the worst bet. But even if traditional education has lost its allure, it doesn't explain why simple intellectual curiosity seems to have gone out the door as well. Well, now you are actually going to have to listen to my old man yells at sky rant. Because truly, your mum was right. It's that damn phone. Well, part of it.
My name is Gloria Mark. I am Chancellor's Professor Emerita at University of California, Irvine. I am the author of the book called Attention Span, and I write a Substack on the same topic called The Future of Attention.
Dr. Mark's interest in this subject originated from her personal experience back in the early 2000s.
I was trained as a psychologist, so I had this very deep interest in how the mind works. And I became especially interested in it from my own experience, noticing how my own attention started to be diminishing when I was using tech, how I was multitasking. And I asked colleagues, is it just me? Does anyone else have this experience? And others said yes, they've noticed the same thing. So I figured I have the tools to be able to study this empirically, right, as a scientist. And so that's how I began to study it.
What's crazy to realize nowadays is that at the time, this was pioneering work.
Yeah, so unfortunately, no one had ever studied attention spans before 2004. And so we really had nothing to compare it against.
And the initial results were shocking.
So what we found at the time was that people switched any activity on average every 3 minutes. But if we just looked at their attention on screens, they switched on average every 2.5 minutes. Now, at the time, this astonished me because I didn't expect, and I thought, well, maybe people might spend 15 minutes, maybe at worst 7-8 minutes, but I really didn't expect to see this kind of switching of attention on screens every 2.5 minutes on average.
And it's only gotten worse.
So in 2012, the average attention span was 75 seconds on screens. And then starting from around 2016 through 2020, right before the pandemic, the average comes to 47 seconds, average on a screen before switching. This has been replicated by others as well.
And this isn't just something that happens with young people like the news or your grandparents would have you believe.
In our research, we have not seen a difference. I've looked at college students and people in the workplace roughly between the ages of 25 and 65. And we've looked for age differences and we've not seen them.
For everyone across all ages, depending on digital products as a crutch does affect your brain physically.
I'll give you one concrete example, and that's with the use of GPS. A lot of people complain that they've lost their ability to navigate because they're reliant on GPS. But studies of brain imaging show that the hippocampus size has actually shrunk for people who are heavy GPS users. There's more than one study that shows this. There's actually a very interesting study that shows the converse. It shows that London taxi drivers who have to memorize a map of the convoluted streets of London in their mind, they have very large hippocampus sizes, larger than people who don't have to do it. So we are seeing an effect of this in terms of hippocampus size.
Okay then, but how do these changes affect our lives?
It certainly is affecting us. Certainly we're seeing a correlation of stress with shorter attention spans. And in fact, the World Health Organization had designated stress to be an epidemic of the 21st century. Because when you're switching your attention so rapidly, you're not thinking deeply. You're not reflecting. You're not deliberating over the material. There's a psychological concept called depth of processing, which means that the more people are actively engaged with information, the better they are able to comprehend it and to retain it. That doesn't happen when we're, looking at short snippets of content from educators in K through 12 who I've been speaking with. They tell me that students are having a much harder time paying attention than earlier years. And so what they're doing is they're adjusting content to match shorter attention spans. I worry about a gradual shift in society to not only reinforce our short attention spans, but to accept them. That we're reaching a new level of normal where it's fine to have short attention spans. It's fine to not do the cognitive work to be able to learn something. And I really worry about the effects that this is going to have.
No rational adult believes TikTok-style content is an acceptable substitute for real learning. But when generations of kids raised on YouTube Shorts make it to the classroom, what if that's the only thing their brains are capable of digesting? Is this the future of history class or biology 101? Smartphones and social media have been consciously engineered to demand our ongoing attention, not for long sustained periods of time, but in endless small bites. Endless scroll layouts create feeds that are easy to start but never actually end. Multiple apps, tabs, and devices encourage stop-start piecemeal multitasking. These constant external and internal reminders create a world in which sustained focus and sustained thought becomes increasingly challenged. So much so that simply being in the same room as your phone has been demonstrated to lower mental aptitude. How far has our collective brain power devolved? What happens to a society when too few of its citizens possess the intellectual curiosity and the mental stamina to seek out facts and evaluate objective truth? For René DiResta, the doorway to a scary new world cracked open back in 2013. In researching preschools, René noticed that childhood vaccinations for deadly diseases like measles, which she had given her own child without a second thought, were, in her California Bay Area community, seemingly seen as optional at best.
I actually went to the California Public Health databases, and there were some schools in the neighborhood that had measles rate uptake in like 33%. And I said, my God, this is insane, actually. So I started writing about it.
Despite a measles outbreak in California linked to Disneyland, local law at the time allowed for voluntary opt-out of vaccinations for any reason. Leading the charge against that law was a state senator who also happened to be a pediatrician.
And I got involved in that legislative fight. Me and a couple of other moms who I didn't even know started an organization called Vaccinate California. We met on the internet.
At that point, Renee quickly became acquainted with a passionate group of whose existence she was previously unaware.
The anti-vaccine movement had been very well networked online for a very long time. And they had also been very accustomed to using techniques like harassment to push people out of the conversation for a very long time, because unfortunately it works. You can use intimidation.
Renee was shocked to see that for anti-vax zealots, few tactics were actually off the table.
I had a Facebook profile which I hadn't locked down in a million different ways yet. I didn't know better at the time. And they went and they took pictures from my profile of me with my baby. We were at Disneyland for Halloween. I was dressed as Maleficent. He was dressed as the little crow. And they said that, they took those photos and they started sharing them into harassment hashtags saying that we were Satanists.
Other moms in Vaccinate California endured the same.
They would send instant messages to people's older kids, to kind of like high school age kids, saying like, do you know what your mom is doing? So it was these sort of tactics that were gross, really, but the intent was to make it feel like it was a liability to participate. This isn't unique to the anti-vaccine movement, of course.
These and other eye-opening experiences led Dr. DiResta, now a research professor at Georgetown, to write a book called Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. We reached out to Renee to help us first understand why junk science and other mistruths wield so much power in online dialogue, increasingly nowadays spilling over into the real world. Notice the use of the word lies in her book's title. A term we would commonly apply to anti-vax content is misinformation, but Renee finds that label misleading.
Misinformation implies that there is a fact that is wrong, and that if you just correct the fact, people are going to say, whoops, I got it wrong, and they're going to maybe change their mind. And so it's not necessarily misinformation where the problem is the fact, where you can say, no, here are 10 studies that show that this is safe. Here are 10 studies that show that this doesn't cause that. Here are 10 studies. Because the fact, that is not the point. The point is the fear.
She therefore lays the blame not with the army of angry online commentators and trolls, but with the malicious few who have carefully cultivated their warped views.
I had my first baby in 2013. I have 3 kids. But when I had my first, my Facebook feed fundamentally changed. All of a sudden, I started getting recommended mom content. And a lot of the mom content that I got recommended was anti-vaccine content. And it's because that's where a lot of the high engagement stuff was. And oftentimes, if you would click through and go to their websites, they would be very, very heavily monetized. Because what they would want to do is they would want to sell you alternative products. So get my oils, get my supplements, get my books, get my kits, get my 10-part web series, right? So I have a great deal of empathy for the people who are fearful, who are uncertain, who are hesitant, who don't know who to trust, who don't know what messages to believe. And I think that is very distinctly different from the profiteering grifters who do what I just described.
Like queen bees, thought leaders in community like these, driven by attention and profit, enjoy the outreach and intimidation efforts of their many volunteer worker drones. What drives that passion and that fear? In the case of the anti-vax crowd, why are so many so willing to disregard the advice of the medical establishment and trusted family doctors in favor of online charlatans that they've never even met? It's easy to just point and laugh, but the reality is much more nuanced. Overall faith in traditional institutions is failing fast. Government, church, media, our collective belief that these one-time pillars will tell us the truth and have our best interests at heart has fallen in half over the last 50 years. In the past, there were experts, and by and large, people listened to them. But then, for a wide variety of reasons, cracks in that armor began to appear. For many, experts is now synonymous with elites, and elites, of course, are the enemy. What follows from here is a kind of asymmetric online warfare. The institutions we have been taught to trust operate at a natural disadvantage.
So there is still somewhere inside an expectation that this group of institutional media is going to tell you the truth, actually. That experts do, in fact, know what they're talking about, but that gotcha model drives a lot of engagement. Two things can both be true. Institutions screw up sometimes. They should be more transparent. They should reckon with things when they do. Also, at the same time, that effort to undermine them constantly is happening because of an incentive where the influencer themselves is maximizing economically and in terms of attention from undermining that institution.
And the thing about a lot of social media is that it targets and elicits very basic emotional responses from us. So basic responses like excitement or fear or disgust, these kinds of basic emotional responses keep us glued to the site because we want to experience these, especially happiness or excitement or shock. Those kinds of responses are intriguing for us and want us to keep going for more.
Every time you open an app, it is using all the tools at its disposal to figure out ways to keep you scrolling. Tech giants know we don't just respond to the things we like, we respond to novelty, to intricate conspiracy theories and exciting gossip, no matter how far-fetched. It's easy to judge, but have you ever seen a social media story so tantalizing you foolishly shared first and fact-checked it later? At the end of the day, none of us are immune. Unlike the vast majority of online content, real life is nuanced and complicated. The health of a society and a democracy depends on the voting public valuing and being able to employ logic. Logic means structured thinking. It is the very antithesis of going with your gut. The gold standard of logical and productive human thought is the Greek philosophy of epistemology. The idea is separate fact from belief. Fact is determined on the basis of establishing truth, based on credible evidence and the use of reason. In 1858, a series of famed debates between Senator Stephen Douglas and former President Abraham Lincoln involved whole towns full of ordinary citizens, many of them illiterate and uneducated, evaluating carefully constructed arguments and counter-arguments in events lasting 3 hours. Contrast the world in which Lincoln-Douglas debates were conducted with the 2024 US presidential election, the front lines of which were largely inflammatory TikToks and non-stop political memes. And that's not just politics. When all eyeballs are on short-form content, how is anyone supposed to convey more than the simplest thoughts and ideas? Scientists who hope to communicate their research and findings outside of their own specialized community have to settle for thoroughly dumbed-down YouTube videos. But it's not just that we like our viral content short and sweet, it's also that comparing and contrasting competing information is mentally taxing. Many people, although they claim to be interested in the news and truth, are really just looking for something that hits them in the feels. In the online world, which increasingly seems like the only world that matters, bold and unambiguous sensationalist messaging is the ultimate recipe for reaching the widest possible audience. You'll sometimes hear it said that we live in a post-truth society. Well, the irony is that a world of verifiable truth to separate fact from fiction is rarely more than a Google away, unless you indulge in the most extreme conspiratorial thinking and believe little readily available online information can be trusted. The truth is out there, and it's usually not hard to find. This then is the real question. Why do people who care about spicy subjects rush to flood your feed with dodgy content but are never interested in taking a quick second just to see if any of it is actually true? Well, largely because deep down they're not looking for the truth. They're looking for arguments and evidence to confirm what they already believe. There's a sort of power that comes from embracing ignorance, or maybe just your own set of facts. Much of the irrationality infecting our cultural dialogue can be attributed to people who don't like getting their answers from authority figures, but who also lack the critical thinking skills to evaluate information for themselves. Now, of course, as a YouTube channel that enjoys pondering and exploring all of life's great mysteries, we love the idea of people doing their own research. But isn't it funny how whenever they do, it always seems to end up confirming the biases they went in with at the start? Perhaps there is an even deeper reason so many people are embracing and even celebrating ignorance. There's a sense that our so-called cultural superiors have taken advantage of us, little people, and they're looking down on us, and they've been looking down on us for too long, and now the mob is finally getting their revenge. In the dopamine-driven online arena, boring old facts get shouted down and replaced with sexier fake news and conspiracy theories. Opportunistic political figures have observed this phenomenon of anti-intellectualism and embraced it.
I love the poorly educated. We're the smartest people, we're the most loyal people.
Mistrust in public institutions like the government and academia, stoked by unconventional outsider political figures, makes people even more doubtful of scientific information. And now the lunatics are running the asylum. Over the course of the last decade, René DiResta has been a first-hand witness as the anti-science movement has gone mainstream.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. showed up to California to kind of fight with the anti-vaxxers to support in defense of measles, was kind of how I put it. But now he runs the CDC and Health and Human Services, right?
As if we didn't already have it bad enough, in the last 2 years, that problem has gotten much, much worse. What would you say happened to our collective ability to do mental math when calculators came along? I think we'd all agree everyone got worse at arithmetic. What happened to our ability to remember basic facts post-Google? We all got more forgetful, right? So what then happens when a new kind of tool comes along, one that allows us to outsource not just mental arithmetic or trivia, but all of our curiosity about everything, both mental and emotional, providing endless answers with only a few mouse clicks?
They started getting these emails saying, hey, I started using this tool called ChatGPT, and I think my memory became worse. So I can be like, hey, can we measure that? And this new tool, right? It's barely 3 years old, barely. And it's been right now introduced in all of the aspects of our lives, everywhere, right? And so, of course, the question was naturally, okay, so do we actually know what's happening in the brain? No one really ran a study, so we decided to design one. My name is Natalia Kosmina, and I'm a research scientist at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Media Lab, and I work on what is known as brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, for the past 16 years. And today we're going to be talking about one of the recent studies we released called Your Brain on ChatGPT.
Given that her lab is on a college campus, the basic outline of the study was easy enough to drum up. Gather a bunch of students, ask them to write essays. Some can use ChatGPT, while others use search engines. And then others still have to rely on the power of their own mind. In the most basic terms, Dr. Kosmina and her team found that the more robust the technology a given test subject was allowed to use, the less information they retained.
The details, as we know, tiny things do matter. We actually saw this also with our paper and reaction to our paper. By not doing this cognitive work and reading through the things, you would not be as knowledgeable, you would not be able to respond as fast, you would not be as comfortable and fluent in some of those responses.
But how is this any different from things like calculators that came before?
you do not talk to your calculator about your feelings, about your worries, about your stresses at work. You do not go to bed with your calculator. Literally, don't wake up and check your calculator first thing in the morning.
In her well-informed opinion, AI is a transformative technology, a quantum leap forward even from old-school Googling.
So in case of Google, right, there's definitely a cost to attention that was found back in 2008, 2011, changes in our working memory, short-term, long-term memory, and recall.
But Googling still requires active mental participation. It's an aid to thought and not a replacement for it.
The idea there is that you'd still need to work your brain to search for that information. So you like, hey, what is this? Oh, this is about that? Okay, so you kind of need to incorporate what you are looking for, process it, analyze it, kind of pull it together in some coherent story for yourself. So you kind of need to work your brain, if I may say so.
Full disclosure, Dr. Kosmina recently joined Google as a visiting researcher, although this relationship began after the project was completed. In contrast, LLMs like ChatGPT or even Google's Gemini do not allow you to interact with the concepts in the same way. There is no analysis, so you retain a lot less information.
The more you actively engage with material, the better able you are to understand and to retain it. What do we do with large language models? We issue a command and it produces output. That's very different than doing that directly yourself. So we're not doing depth of processing when we're using LLMs.
Predictably, much of the mainstream reaction to the MIT study played up the potentially negative implications of a world in which many of our day-to-day mental tasks are outsourced to AI. Natalia largely considers this a classic case of confirmation bias, people seeing what they, or what their audience, want to see.
So I'm personally very, very excited for AI. The paper we released literally 2 weeks after this one actually does connect ChatGPT and brain activity of a person literally to actually improve and change some of the outputs. So here you go, so much for anti-AI.
And like it or not, it's already here and it's here to stay, having insinuated itself into every corner of the online world.
We all use it. We already all use it. You hate it, you still use it, you still use it.
Still, her eyes are wide open to the unprecedented dangers that it might represent.
Social media is a great example of what we have already lost, like the train that already left the platform. Social media is an excellent, awful excellent example in this way of things that we didn't regulate well. We missed so much.
In a perfect world, the powers that be would have been ready for the challenges presented by LLMs.
Government oversight needs to happen in a more proactive and not reactive way, right? It's so social media. Like, why haven't we learned anything from that example? LLMs are ultimately, you would say, on the scale are 10-fold, 100-fold, ultimately more powerful. So why that is not being taken into consideration? They were not just released randomly in December of 2022. That product was in the making and we knew about it. So why it's only researchers that are monitoring that?
Governments weren't the only ones that were caught flat-footed. For all we know, the entire higher education system could very well be on the brink of collapse.
I want to say the 12th of December, 2022, and I was grading exams, and it's the end of the semester. Look, a plagiarized essay normally screams its nature, right? It's a piece of crap. It's a cobbled together document that shows they have no idea what they're supposed to be writing about. This was not that, right? This was not a piece of crap. It was well written enough. It showed an excellent understanding of something I expected them to understand, and then just absolutely got Hume wrong on something else. That's odd. That's just not a set of red flags I'd ever seen before. And I'd heard people talking about this ChatGPT thing on the internet, but I would say broadly and in general, we had no idea what it was capable of. So I turned to this AI thing. All right, what is this? And I played with it. And eventually I came out with something that was producing verbal quirks that looked very much like what this essay looked like.
Dr. Hick had just encountered his first example of what we now know as ChatGPT hallucination.
I'm Darren Hick. I am Associate Professor of Philosophy at Furman University.
In addition to contacting his school's administrators, Darren then went online and made a post, one that would ultimately be shared 17,000 times.
My first move after doing that was to then explain all this to the internet. I thought, I've got a lot of friends on Facebook right now who are also crunching their way through essays. There's a solid chance they're going to encounter this thing, which at that point was 2 weeks old. And so I thought, I'll just put this out there on the internet and, it sort of pull a Paul Revere and say the AI is coming.
It was immediately obvious that academia was in for a massive challenge.
So I looked at all my assignments, including the assignments I had coming up that next semester, and it was like I had specifically written these things to be answered by ChatGPT. It screamed at me and said, you are in for it. I've thought more about teaching in the last 2.5 years than I've taught about it in the last 20.
Even before AI came to college campuses, many were already panicked about the contemporary state of academia.
I think that our students today have had a healthy dose of skepticism drilled into them. I would say my students now are more skeptical about claims that are made to them. I don't know if they have been given the same skills for actually going and doing the research and finding out whether it was true, but I think their skepticism is a good place to start.
And he believes many of them possess a genuine desire to learn.
I would say they're stunted. However, I think that this is balanced out by a greatly increased curiosity and willingness to at least do a first stage of research on things that they are personally interested in without there being a project associated with that. So I think we're seeing a new set of skills that they've self-developed.
But in far too many cases, the world that they were born into has simply let them down.
Students who were elementary school students and high school students during the pandemic, there has been a definite drop-off in their preparedness for college. We are just starting to work our way out of that thing, but there's some weird effects we're seeing. It's not unusual for a student to have not read a book prior to coming to college. It's becoming more obvious. I'll put it that way.
As helpful a tool as ChatGPT is, it might be the worst thing that could happen to students. Young people should be building up their reasoning powers by pouring mental energy into researching and writing schoolwork, and now they can just get their own personal Jarvis to do much of it for them, skipping the reps their developing brains so desperately need. If you think ChatGPT has ruined your critical thinking skills, consider future generations who might not ever even have the chance to develop them in the first place. We have entered truly uncharted territory, a brave new world.
Here, it potentially could be a danger for the whole development of critical thinking. In the very beginning, right, think about it, you and me, we were born when LLMs were not a thing, right? So we developed the skill and ultimate skill to ask a question. And also, obviously, have the answer, understanding the answer, having the argument, disagreeing, right, having it hopefully polite as a discourse, the conversation in society. Now think about a child, right? We don't have right now results on any of these uses of LLMs on children. However, that is the real risk we are running here, right? If you have been, taught with an LLM and there were no way of supervising it, right? We do not have actually data that would show that you would be able to develop these critical, thinking skills of being in a society, in a human society, and more importantly, actually developing any human relationships. We don't have this data. I'm not talking specifically of adults who already developed them. That's exactly, already the case. You have already developed it. Most likely you will also lose some of it. But I'm talking about the base, right? The base skills, the base understanding. You don't have base, it will be very hard for you to do any math. If you don't have a base, it's going to be very hard for you to build a conversation. So the idea is that you would not be able to pull two words together, literally, and more importantly, you would not be able to build real human conversations, and more importantly, relationships, right? So all of this can actually be really, really devolving for our society, and that can actually happen within one generation, so very, very fast. And I'm pretty sure no one wants this, this devolution.
This dark vision of the future does not seem all that far-fetched or even that far off. When OpenAI released ChatGPT-5, many people complained, not because AI was stealing their jobs, but because they felt that OpenAI was taking away their friend. The GPT-5 model was designed to be less friendly, and the outrage was so much that OpenAI had to reopen access to the older models because people were already too emotionally attached to it. It was so bad that Sam Altman had to make a statement that the parasocial bonds people were forming with ChatGPT was a pretty bad idea, and was moved to make an online statement detailing his discomfort with these parasocial bonds. The statement seemingly alluded to some deeply disturbing incidents that have recently been making headlines. Removing companion mode for the time being was a well-advised precaution, but it was only a band-aid. With a few tweaks, it might well be back for version 6.0, and even if it's not, as we all know, where there's demand, supply will inevitably present itself. If OpenAI won't provide virtual companions, then their competitors will. As we reckon with a world in which humankind struggles to find the common ground of agreed-upon truth, are we already moving into a new one in which humans no longer seek to connect with each other at all? So, that's where we are. Collapsing IQs, compromised critical thinking skills, insufficient attention spans, the embrace of ignorance, coupled with opportunistic leaders stoking the flames of stupidity. All of which is supercharged by information distributing systems that discourage deep thought and further alienate us from one another. It all sounds pretty dark. In the city of Trent, Italy, in 1475, a 2-year-old child has gone missing, and without evidence, a Franciscan preacher named Bernardo de Feltre seized the opportunity to spread anti-Semitic hate, accusing the local Jewish population of unaliving the child and drinking its blood. Moving swiftly and decisively, the Pope denounces the story, but he's completely ignored. A local politician orders a roundup of the entire city's Jewish population. Dozens are tortured. 15 of them are burned at the stake. And all the while, the Pope, traditionally held up as the messenger of God's will on earth and an authority on the level of kings, is helpless to stop the madness. Why? 40 years earlier, in Germany, Johannes Gutenberg had invented the printing press. Almost overnight, sensational handbills became ubiquitous throughout Europe. Propagandists competed to see who could spread the most effective gossip, hearsay, and slander. Local populations were intoxicated by the steady stream of inflammatory content, distrust of powerful figures like the Pope, who had previously controlled the flow of information from the top down and abused their power at the expense of the peasantry, made common people all too eager to believe alternative facts that fed into their worst prejudices. Too few were able to truly comprehend that just because something was printed on a piece of paper did not mean it necessarily contained the truth. Now, after I've said all of that, does it sound familiar at all? Political influencers are the modern analog of the authors of these inflammatory handbills. No one really knows what happened to that abducted child. The only certainty is that Father Feltre's hateful accusations weren't true, and yet the child, named Simonino, was canonized as a martyr of the Christian faith at the hand of bloodthirsty infidels. He remains a saint to this day, over 500 years later. Proof that fake news can sometimes have real staying power. But here's the silver lining. This whole episode was arguably the darkness before the dawn. While Gutenberg's printing press supercharged the dissemination of dodgy info, it also helped spread new religious and philosophical ideas previously unavailable to the common man. No medium of communicating information is inherently good or bad, it's just what we make of it. And ultimately, Gutenberg's printing press is mostly associated with the good it did and the movement that it enabled. That's the kind of movement we could use right now. A new enlightenment. Considering that this is a video about stupidity, it's pretty dumb that we've made it this far without establishing what stupidity actually is. You see, the thing with stupidity is that it's very easy to spot, but it's actually pretty hard to define. For one thing, stupidity is not the same thing as ignorance. Ignorance means you don't know things, or at least not yet. Stupidity means you aren't able to learn or you simply don't want to. French philosopher Christian Godin puts several fine points on what stupidity is and is not. He notes that stupidity avoids and distrusts complexity. As soon as an explanation becomes complicated or counterintuitive, you can see the stupid person become frustrated and shut off. It's why phrases like, "Sai bao," shut your bitch ass up, "just put the fries in the bag, bro," or "it's not that deep" are now more popular than ever. No one wants to engage in critical thinking or any sort of complex discussion. Stupidity dislikes change and the unfamiliar. It puts faith in stability and what it knows, and views the unknown with suspicion, derision, and fear. When confronted with disagreement, stupidity resorts to mockery. Stupidity finds comfort in blindly following rules and sticking with herd mentality. Godin also notes that very few people think they're stupid, and indeed, that being blind to one's shortcomings is an easy tell that someone lacks true intelligence. Swedish professor Sverre Spultra agrees, pointing out that paradoxically, feeling stupid can often be a sign of intelligence. Many stupid people assume that they have everything figured out. Smart people are aware of the holes in their knowledge and, rather than feeling insecure and threatened because of them, are motivated to fix them and overcome them. No one knows everything, and no one holds the correct opinion on every issue, large or small. One of the smartest things you can do is to maintain the humility to accept that everyone, including, yes, ourselves, is stupid in some way. A 2015 study of everyday instances of stupidity assigned the highest order of stupidity to what you might call confident ignorance, believing that you are the smartest person in the room and, acting on that belief, revealing yourself to be the dumbest. Here's an example. A thief who cleverly hatched a plot to steal a bunch of GPS devices. This link between high confidence and being blissfully unaware of one's own ignorance leads to what is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which explains the dumbest voice in the room is often the loudest. It also calls to mind the political philosopher Machiavelli, who preached that a strong and charismatic leader who speaks in grandiose and simple statements is likely to outmaneuver a more intelligent and likely more qualified rival, for the simple reason that intelligence often leads to caution and self-doubt, even when well-warranted, and less bold action. In looking at our current geopolitical landscape, do those words remind you of anyone? Perhaps in some small ways, the tide against ignorance and unfettered distraction is already turning. The first step in fixing a problem is always simply recognizing and acknowledging that it exists. If it sometimes feels less like you own a phone and more that your phone owns you, Dr. Mark encourages you to fight the good fight.
People, we're not just mere pawns. I believe that people can take agency to take back their attention. It takes work,
there's a real cost to the time that we spend and honestly waste online.
So the time that you're spending on social media, right? And maybe it depends on the person, but a lot of people don't feel very fulfilled when they go on social media. But after they're off, they say, wait, what did I just look at for the last 30 minutes? But there's an opportunity cost, because we could instead spend that time reading something that's a lot more powerful and inspiring, getting immersed in a book. Immersion is such a powerful mechanism. And, when you think back to when you've read a book that just captured your attention so much, and after reading it, it wasn't lost on you, right? It stays with you because it affected you in some way. So I think we should be thinking about replacing time spent with something that doesn't provide value with some other activity that does.
Luckily, as our society's leading expert on the subject, Dr. Mark has some practical advice for how to reclaim and restore your ability to focus and cut your personal attention deficit.
All right, so what can people do? So a notification on your screen, that creates an automatic response to look at that blinking notification. I might click on it automatically. So what can we do about that? Well, one thing we can do is to raise these automatic actions to a more conscious awareness. I call this meta awareness, which means probing yourself to become more aware of the things you're doing. So every time I have an urge to go to read the news, I'll stop myself and I'll probe myself. Do I have to read it right now? Why do I have to read it? Usually it's because I'm procrastinating, or I'm curious, or I'm bored. But that question causes me to reflect, makes me more conscious of my actions. When you're more conscious, you can be more intentional. When you're more intentional, you can form a plan. And so my plan might be, okay, I'm going to work 20 more minutes, and then I'm going to take a break.
Next, stop setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. Pace yourself and realize that breaks aren't a bad thing.
Another thing we can do is to take more breaks. When our minds are fatigued, executive function becomes fatigued, and we become even more susceptible to distractions. So by taking breaks, it can help us replenish our cognitive resources, helps our executive function, kind of get back up to speed.
And finally,
another thing we can do is to be aware of our attentional rhythms. What do I mean by that? So we've studied people throughout the day, and we find that there are peaks and valleys of when people are focused. It's very easy to figure out when your attentional peaks are. Are you an early type, a late type? You can also just keep a simple journal. And what you can do is to plan your day in terms of putting the hardest work that has to be done, to do it at those times when your attention will be at its peak. And don't waste that time doing email or going on social media. Reserve that time.
By this point, society is aware that change is needed. Most Americans support at least some limits on the use of smartphones in school. And almost half of us believe much of the information we encounter online is likely false. Even more admit to difficulty in distinguishing online fact from fiction. Furthermore, 4 out of 5 people agree that we urgently need a more effective way of managing and filtering online information to differentiate between fact and fantasy. In the face of vast and powerful irrational forces, what we believe, or choose to believe, matters. It's not just about likes and followers. There are real-life implications.
Tornadoes don't care if you believe in them or not. They're going to level your house anyway, right? Pathogens don't care if you believe in them or not. You're going to get sick. you do need consensus reality. You do need that ability to come together and say, we all agree that this data is accurate. We all agree that these experts are processing it accurately and correctly. And we don't have that now. And that is what I think is dangerous.
Hopefully, as we collectively realize that the internet information ecosystem is not serving us, either it will evolve or we will evolve and look elsewhere. There is some evidence that traditional institutions of information and expertise are belatedly wising up and realizing that they need to combat bad information and bad actors on their own terms and on the modern battlefield.
The idea that you're going to continue to communicate the way you did in the era of top-down broadcast era press conferences, like, no, it's not going to work. This is the era that we're in now. Adapt to the era that we're in now and move forward. You would see the institutions and public health officials put out these very boring fact sheets, and they wouldn't speak in stories. They wouldn't use memes. They wouldn't really do very much that was designed to go viral. They wouldn't engage with influencers. Now you're starting to see a rise of a whole lot of physicians who are speaking as influencers themselves, who have now, 1 million followers, who are out there saying, we're going to put out content. When a government speaker who's not giving accurate information says something, we're going to counter it. We're going to put out good information, and we're going to do it in a way that goes viral so that other people can share it.
It can be easy to be intimidated by the prospect of ever more powerful artificial intelligence. Dr. Kosmina reminds us that the AI revolution is still in its infancy.
But there are new tools, like LLMs are a thing of the past, so to say. I know it's crazy when I'm saying that, but you have new ones that are coming, like you have robotics, but then you will have neural computing, you will have BCIs. Are we ready for robotics? Are we ready for BCIs? We are not. So why is it so? Is it because, this is a thing in 30 years? No, it's not in 30 years, and it's not even in 10 years. It's in 2, 3, and 5.
For all the talk of ChatGPT brain rot and machine learning eliminating human careers, AI has undoubtedly already changed many of our lives for the better, handling the menial and mundane mental chores from which we derive no satisfaction. But what else will it become? Many fear AI will someday surpass and render unnecessary mankind's more elevated pursuits. Perhaps it will make human-created art look primitive and uninspired. But if history is any guide, it will just as likely provide us with tools to take our own creative expression to new heights, just as cameras, digital musical instruments, and so many other innovations, each derided as the death of human art on their arrival, did in the past. We hold the keys. We are the drivers. Each of us votes for the kind of world that we want to live in with every click and keystroke. Far-fetched dystopian fantasies aside, artificial intelligence will likely only become as helpful or destructive as we human beings allow it to be, through the choices about when and how we use it and allow our children to use it. Likewise, we hold the keys to the intellectual future of our species. The phrase, doing your own research, has come to function as shorthand for the worldview of people who are hostile to actual facts.
I think a lot of the times that phrase has come to mean, I Googled for the things that I already wanted to believe. That's where you get into trouble, right? When that turns into a reflexive, contrarian distrust for every institution out there, that's where I think you start to have some problems.
But ironically, a big part of the solution to the problems that we collectively face lies in our collective willingness and ability to do our own research, only to do it the right way. And we have the tools at our disposal to help us in that pursuit that would have seemed like sci-fi futurism to our forefathers, the very same ones that so many of us fear.
And I think that having that humility and saying there are people who know a lot more than me on this topic, and I can do my own research, meaning I can go and I can pull down papers. I can upload them to ChatGPT if I want to now, and I can ask it to, in thinking mode, like help process a paper. I can ask it in deep research mode for more recommendations. There's different ways that you can use certain types of tools to go deeper into research now.
It's time to collectively prioritize seeking actual information over sensationalized sound bites. Rather than seeking out evidence to confirm our existing convictions, to go get out of our own bubbles, question received wisdom and groupthink, and to remain humble and brave enough that we are prepared to revise our own beliefs and opinions when confronted with compelling evidence to the contrary. The time has come to make our devices work for us again, rather than giving them an endless amount of our time and attention and making slaves of ourselves. The time has come for us to pick and choose what screens are good for and when to shut them down. To do some mental heavy lifting and to earn the deep soul satisfaction that can never come from outsourcing a task to a chatbot. The time has come, now, for all of us, to get smart. What if I told you the universe runs on a secret, primordial algorithm? Not one written in lines of code, but one that's woven into the very fabric of reality itself. An algorithm that decides what's meaningful and what isn't, what's coincidental